Mastering the Lightning of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyright or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 76. Rolling Iter. After communicating with the neighbors and friends who came to visit, Anduin also had some impressions of these wizard friends. Mr. Lovegood had wonderful ideas, but he was very naive and outrageously honest. Mrs. Lovegood was a spell scholar and had also tried to research and develop some spells. The Diggory family was very honest and behaved like a kind neighboring couple. The Weasley family invited Anduin to visit them before school started. There were reasons why Molly felt that Anduin was very congenial, and there were also reasons for the Prewett brothers. Of course, Anduin felt that the main reason was that their family was very greedy. Mr. Weasley was very interested in him after learning that he was a Muggle-born wizard. He had an extraordinary curiosity about the Muggle world, which might be related to the fact that he had been in the Office of Prohibition of Abuse of Muggle items. His department was mainly responsible for dealing with the problem of wizards casting spells on Muggle items at random, but Anduin felt that Mr. Weasley was likely to take advantage of his position and test the law. The happy gathering time passed quickly. The guests said goodbye to the Longbottom family and Anduin with satisfaction. The Longbottoms were also very satisfied with this vacation, with smiles all over their faces. The food cooked by Anduin was almost swept away. Our old Mrs. Longbottom also felt very proud and kept praising Anduin for his good cooking skills. After the Longbottoms ended their vacation, they started their intense oral work again. Recently, the Death Eaters have gradually started to move again. Whether it is torturing and killing Muggles, sneak attacks and harming wizards or Aurors, related cases have been one after another, and there is no sign of stopping at all, which makes the Auror Command extremely anxious. Anduin didn't understand this very much. The main job of Aurors is to patrol various wizard gathering places, including Diagon Alley, Hogsmeade, etc. There are also Aurors around the village of Ottery Street, Catchpole, where Anduin is located, but there is no corresponding alarm feedback system. If there is a wizard attack, basically they can only passively wait for rescue, or resist or run away. Many wizards were attacked, and the Aurors were often late. Then, they had very few means of tracking. Basically, they could only wait for reports or obtain intelligence through visits. In his spare time, Anduin also discussed the work of Aurors with the Longbottoms. They said that the Ministry of Magic had a very powerful detection array that could cover the whole of Britain. It was located in the Office for the Prohibition of the Abuse of Magic in the Ministry of Magic. Usually, the Aurors were divided into two parts, one went out on patrol, and the other was on standby at the headquarters. On the one hand, it was to protect the headquarters, and on the other hand, it was to maintain mobility. However, the array detection had a delay, and it was difficult to identify the specific person. Just like at the Longbottom house, when Anduin cast a spell, the Ministry of Magic could not determine who cast the spell. Therefore, although the whole of Britain was covered by the detection, many people cast spells every day, and they had to divide people to monitor the traces to prevent underage wizards from casting spells. Only when there is a high energy reaction or a fluctuation of the unforgivable curse in an area, the mobile force will appear. Some Death Eaters attack wizards with low spell strength, so the Ministry of Magic will miss it, and then they can only wait for the escaped or injured wizards to report to the Ministry of Magic, otherwise the Ministry of Magic will not even know that there has been a fight. Of course, the Ministry of Magic has increased its monitoring efforts now, and if there are slightly more frequent spells, there will be Aurors to investigate. Moreover, their timely training speed is not fast. They mainly rely on the high-level application of the Patronus charm to quickly find the corresponding wizards and pass on information, but even many Aurors do not know this high-level skill, so a more effective method is to use apparition to communicate, which also leads to the fact that the main force leading this war is still intelligence, but there is a force within the Ministry of Magic that supports the Dark Lord. They will pass the Aurors' intelligence to the Death Eaters, which leads to the current Ministry of Magic being basically in a situation where the enemy is in the dark and we're in the light. So that's why there is the Order of the Phoenix. No wonder so many Aurors have joined the Order of the Phoenix. Faced with such a situation, it is indeed necessary to establish an organization whose actions are not exposed to the Ministry of Magic to exist. But this cannot avoid the problem of inefficiency of Aurors and the Order of the Phoenix. It is like in a feudal society, where cases can only be handled and murderers arrested after the fact, even though there are so many convenient and efficient supernatural means. Death Eaters can use the Dark Mark to conduct some simple communications, and the Dark Lord can also use the Dark Mark to summon or give orders to Death Eaters, but the Aurors have too few means of communication and vigilance. If all wizards have an alarm device or alarm spell, and if they can quickly notify the Auror office when attacked, the number of attacks will be greatly reduced, and support will be more timely. At the same time, Anduin also learned that there is a striker unit in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. They have higher authority than ordinary Aurors, but they also have more dangerous tasks. Their work is often assigned to the front line of fighting crime. Some strikers are also Aurors, but not all Aurors are strikers. For example, Madai Moody is the captain of a striker class and is also responsible for the work of Aurors. In Anduin's view, Aurors are like ordinary policemen, and strikers are more like armed police forces. However, perhaps because these wizards had not experienced any battles, in his opinion, the battlefield literacy of these Aurors really needs to be improved. When a battle broke out, they basically went up to cast spells without any coordination, and basically acted independently. At the same time, Anduin also learned that there was a position called roaming strikers. No, this was not even a formal position. Anyway, there was no such official position in the Ministry of Magic. Their work was a bit like bounty hunters. They did not have a salary, but after catching dark wizards or criminal wizards, they could submit them to the Ministry of Magic to earn a bounty. They could even specifically hunt down criminals with high bounties. For such bounty wizards, the Ministry of Magic would symbolically give them a certificate of roaming strikers. However, roaming strikers did not have the corresponding official authority. The only useful thing was that they could use this certificate to make bounty arrests abroad, which was also recognized by the Ministry of Magic abroad, and then receive the bounty from the Ministry of Magic abroad. However, if these roaming strikers violated the laws of the local Ministry of Magic, they would even be arrested. Almost no one was doing this like threatening business now, but it was very convenient to apply for it, and it could even be done as a part-time job. According to Frank, Cyrus had applied for such a certificate, and he thought it was cool at one time, but threw it away soon after. He described this profession as a waste of paper from the Ministry of Magic, because even if you are not a roving striker, you will get a bounty from the Ministry of Magic after catching a dark wizard. It's like taking off your pants to fart, an unnecessary step. Unless you were enforcing the law abroad, there is no need to affix such an official certificate. Chapter 77 The Barrow. Anduin was very interested in this. In his plan, he wanted to see the world after graduating from Hogwarts. He might take a magical trip around the world. If he could get this certificate, he could make some extra money when he met dark wizards in other countries. Therefore, Anduin also asked Frank about the application method of this identity, and then found that this certificate was really casual. As long as he submitted an application to the Department of International Magical Cooperation, as long as he had no criminal record, basically anyone could successfully apply. As for why he had to apply to the Department of International Magical Cooperation instead of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, it was because this profession first appeared in the Magical Congress of the United States, and then Wizarding World also recognized this profession, so it spread to various countries. After all, it can help the Ministry of Magic of various countries relieve the pressure of crime. Of course, if it causes damage to the local area during the pursuit, it will also be arrested and repatriated by the Ministry of Magic of various countries. After learning some inside stories of the Ministry of Magic and Aurors, Anduin was very worried about the current situation. The information on both sides was completely unequal. If this world is not like the vague memory of the previous life, if the Dark Lord attacked Harry and was killed, it may fall into a protracted war. Anduin didn't know whether Dumbledore's protection of Lily's family would change history, but if it did, the Wizarding World might not be peaceful for a long time in the future. This kind of insecure life was not what Anduin wanted. If he wanted to change all this, he had to become stronger, and do his best to become stronger. Therefore, in the following days, his spirit was tense again. He developed spells, practiced spells, trained in brain occlumency, and exercised daily. The sense of urgency about safety made Anduin not relax at all. Augusta didn't know what was wrong with Anduin. Except for going downstairs to help with cooking before the return point, and helping Augusta take care of the children when she went out, he stayed in the room all the time. This kind of life lasted for more than a month. On August 9, 1981, when Anduin was helping with cooking, Augusta brought him a message. An invitation from the Weasleys. "Sorry, I almost forgot. Anduin was a little nervous recently, and the spell development had reached a critical juncture, so he forgot about it all at once. Augusta smiled and said, "Yes, I happened to meet Molly yesterday. She was counting on you to teach her some recipes. She will give birth soon, and many fruits in their orchard have matured recently. They want to invite us to visit. Although I don't know why you are so busy every day, it is best to combine work and rest." Anduin nodded, feeling that he seemed to have pushed himself too hard recently. The unknown dangers made him a little nervous, and it was necessary to relax properly. So he nodded and said, "Okay, let's visit the Weasley family tomorrow." The next day, Anduin held little Neville and accompanied Augusta to the Weasley family's burrow, which was located in the outer suburbs of Ottery Street, Catchpole Village. The Weasley family cast a large-scale Muggle-repelling spell and shielding spell there to prevent being disturbed by Muggles. As they approached their destination, Anduin saw from afar a house that looked like it was made of building blocks. It was several stories high. If it were in a Muggle society, such a house would not be built at all. It would fall down in a minute. That was the burrow where the Weasley family lived. There was a small yard in front of the burrow, which looked like a chicken coop. In addition, there was a warehouse that looked like a garage outside. The surrounding scenery was beautiful, and it was a good place to live. As soon as Anduin and Augusta approached, the Weasley family spotted them. Several little guys stuck their heads out of the upper windows and greeted the two. Arthur also heard the noise and opened the front door early to welcome the guests. "Ha, if you don't come to visit again, Molly will have to give birth, and we won't have time to entertain you then." Arthur smiled heartily and greeted the two. Anduin said apologetically, "I'm sorry, it's my fault. I was so obsessed with studying and researching that I forgot about it. You're so motivated at such a young age. I wish my children could be like you. Coming quickly. Molly has been busy in the kitchen," Arthur said with a cheerful expression. Then Arthur led the two into the room and kept chattering to them. "Bill will be 11 years old after his birthday in November this year. It's a pity that he can't enter Hogwarts this year. He has to wait another year. The fruits are growing very well this year. The grapes and plums are very sweet. You must taste them." Anduin and Augusta followed Arthur to the living room and sat down, tasting the fruits they had prepared early. The children also came downstairs one after another, chattering around them. Bill helped his youngest brother on and helped very sensibly. Molly, who was busy in the kitchen, heard the noise and ran out to greet the two, then hurriedly pulled Anduin away. She was ready to learn a few recipes from Anduin. Anduin had a good impression of this hard-working mother and communicated enthusiastically. He showed the methods of several dishes he had made before in the kitchen. Although Molly was pregnant, she still performed cooking spells very flexibly. She and Anduin, who were extremely talented, completed several dishes together. Families with many children are prone to chaos. Molly was concentrating on cooking while still having the energy to yell at the naughty children outside. Every time Molly yelled, the noise from the living room would stop, but after a while, there was a sound of something hitting something, or a child yelling and crying from the living room. Then Molly yelled again, and then instantly stunned the whole scene. Anduin was shocked. How could he know who was causing trouble without even looking? In this warm and chaotic and harmonious family atmosphere, Anduin and Molly prepared lunch for everyone. Then there was a scene of naughty kids making a scene in the restaurant. The 3-year-old twin brothers were the most naughty. They would grab the food from their older brother Percy or Charlie, and scare on in Bill's arms, making him cry. Molly and Bill kept maintaining order at the scene, while Arthur smiled foolishly beside them. But Anduin felt that this family was really lively and the family atmosphere was too strong. It was the first time he felt the atmosphere of such a big family since he came to this world, which made him fall into memories involuntarily. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novel, as there you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 78 Bad News. Molly saw Anduin staring blankly after eating a few bites, and asked in confusion, "What's wrong, Anduin? Is the food not delicious?" "No, I just envy your family, it reminds me of some past events," Anduin replied after coming to his senses. "Oh, Merlin's beard, if these little naughty kids can save me from worrying about them one day, I will be thankful," Molly said distressedly, and then saw Arthur, who was only concerned with eating next to him, and scolded. "And you don't know how to help me take care of them." Arthur shrugged innocently, gave Molly a smile, and then continued to eat happily. The noisy lunch soon came to an end. All the little guys were dirty after eating. Anduin kindly helped them use the cleaning spell to deal with the stains on their bodies, just like helping children wash their hands one by one. You use magic spells very well. I remember that when I was your grade, I couldn't use such a smooth cleaning spell. Arthur praised Anduin. Just practice hard, it's not as complicated as you think. Anduin smiled. Anduin and Augusta accompanied the Weasley family to eat fruit and drink tea, chatting and listening to the Wizard Radio Network. This is a very popular radio station in the wizarding world. It is now broadcasting the Wizard Radio News Network. Several children are not very interested in it. They prefer the Toot Sprouting Root Show talk show and the Magic Hour music program, so they all ran to play in the yard outside. Wizard Radio News reports an urgent news to you. Just now, a violent explosion occurred in the northern part of Cornwall. The Ministry of Magic suspects that it was caused by the activities of Death Eaters in the area. The Ministry of Magic Aurors, Strikers and Incidental Incident Handling teams have gone to check. Please pay attention to personal safety of all wizards in the area. Please wait for follow-up reports on the detailed damage and casualties. The Magic Radio in the Weasley family came with a not-so-good news. Damn, these Death Eaters are getting more and more rampant now. Arthur also frowned when he heard the news broadcast. There has been more and more news like this recently. I hope nothing happens to the people there. I remember that Marlene McKinnon and her fiancé live nearby. I hope they are not affected. Augusta said worriedly. Anduin also frowned in worry. Although people have been sent to a place where an attack occurred, it is very likely too late. Just as he analyzed before, the official response speed is too slow. Now we can only wait quietly for follow-up news. Several people listened to the news in the living room for a while, but there was still no follow-up report of the details of the scene. But at this moment, the Patronus with white light passed through the wall of the burrow. It was a small mink. Anduin had seen it before. He remembered that it was Frank's Patronus. The mink stopped in front of Augusta, and a voice came from the light and shadow of the Patronus. Ma'am, a murder has occurred in Cornwall. Marlene McKinnon's family has been killed. A few miles away from there, the Prewett brothers who were responsible for coming to support were also ambushed by the Death Eaters and sacrificed. Now the body is 3 miles north of Marlene's house. Moody thinks it is necessary to notify you first, and then help to send a message to the neighbor Weasley family. We know that Mrs. Weasley is about to give birth, so please consider whether to tell her this bad news. As soon as Anduin heard the news delivered by the Patronus, he stood up in an instant, and Arthur also sat there in a daze. Several people looked at each other with solemn faces, and then suddenly heard the sound of porcelain falling behind them. Several people turned around and saw Molly looking at them with a pale face, her hands trembling and unable to hold anything. At this time, she was deeply hit and looked shaky and ready to fall at any time. Seeing this, Anduin rushed out quickly, came to Molly and supported her. Arthur also rushed over and helped Molly. Together, they helped Molly sit on the sofa. The air in the house was heavy and suffocating. Anduin, Augusta, and Arthur didn't know what to say at this time. They could only look down at Molly in grief. Anduin poured a glass of water and handed it to Molly. Only then did Molly's eyes focus. She held the glass with trembling hands, and tears could not stop flowing down. Arthur looked at Molly, who was silent but in tears, and could only stroke her back comfortingly. For a while, he couldn't say anything. After a long time, Molly raised her head and looked at her husband, saying, Arthur, go see them for me, please, my 2 poor brothers. Only then did Molly's crying burst out, and for a while, she hung to the sky and the earth. The children playing outside heard their mother crying, and they hurried in, looking at their mother in confusion, not knowing what had happened. Arthur nodded to Molly, then looked at Augusta and said, Mrs. Longbottom, please take care of Molly. She needs you. I have to rush to the scene to confirm. Then he turned to Bill and said, look after your brothers and take care of Mother. I'll be back soon. Anduin also said at this time, Mr. Weasley, I'll go with you. They are all my friends. Arthur shook his head and said, it's not confirmed whether it is safe there. It's better not to go with you. It's too dangerous. Anduin insisted, don't worry, I can protect myself. I will accompany you and you will have someone to take care of each other. Augusta also said at this time, let Anduin accompany you. He is a very independent child and can help you with ideas when the time comes. Seeing that both of them said so, Arthur nodded and said, okay, thank you very much. I'll trouble you here. Anduin also turned to Augusta and said, "Try to notify Diggory's family and ask them to come here to help take care of it. I remember that you can also use the Patronus to send messages. If there is anything urgent, please locate me and send me a message." Augusta nodded in agreement. In her eyes, although Anduin was just a child, he was more reliable than many adult wizards. After making the decision, Arthur took Anduin outside the house and said to Anduin, "I have been to Marlene's house. Let's approach directly to the scene. Hold my hand tightly." Anduin did as he was told, and Arthur and Anduin disappeared immediately. In the northern part of Cornwall, a house in the suburbs was almost blown to pieces. Several Aurors were patrolling now. 2 bodies wrapped in white cloth were placed on the ground outside the house. Frank and Alice stood by with solemn expressions. Chapter 79 Scene. Arthur and Anduin were operating not far from here. The Aurors on alert pointed their wands at the 2 people reflexively. After seeing the figures clearly, they breathed a sigh of relief and put down their wands. Frank and Alice saw that it was them and hurried over. Frank said, "You are here. This is Marlene and her fiancé. The Prewett brothers are in the woods further north. Moody is controlling the scene there. I will take you there." Anduin looked at the 2 bodies wrapped on the ground and the house that was blown to pieces next to it. He could imagine how fierce the battle was here. Alice also looked at the 2 with a sad face, and said to Arthur, "How is Molly? Have you told her the news? Frank and I were very entangled when we arrived at the scene. We didn't know whether to tell you the news as soon as possible." Arthur sighed and said, "Thank you for everything you have done. We were with Mrs. Longbottom at the time. Molly knew the news as soon as possible. Now Augusta is there to help take care of Molly. Anduin and I came to the scene first. After all, it is not convenient for her now." Alice looked at her husband after hearing this. It can be imagined how sad Molly would be after hearing such news. "Frank, you take Arthur over there. I have to wait for McKinnon's family here," Alice said to Frank. Frank nodded, then grabbed Arthur with one hand, and Arthur held Anduin tightly. The 3 of them operated away together. Not far to the north of Marlene McKinnon's house, in a small forest, several Aurors were also on guard. Moody and Barty Crouch, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, were investigating the scene. Juden Prewett and Fabian Prewett on the ground were also covered with white cloth. Frank and the other 2 operated to the scene and nodded to Moody and the others. Anduin accompanied Arthur to check. Anduin noticed that the surrounding trees and the ground had traces of the battle, and the traces of the battle extended to the south. Therefore, he judged that the Prewett brothers should have been chased and ran here from the direction of Marlene's house. In other words, it is possible that the Prewett brothers supported Marlene's house as soon as possible, or that the 2 arrived at the scene just after Marlene's family was killed, and then were chased here in the fierce battle. It seems that the other side has a large number of people. If they arrived before Marlene's family was killed, the 4 people should be able to exist for a while, which means that there are at least 4 Death Eaters involved in the attack. At this time, Arthur stepped forward with a solemn face, uncovered the white cloth, and revealed Juden's pale face. His face was covered with dust and there were many scars on his face. It was obvious that he died after a fierce battle. At this time, Barty Crouch, who was also in grief, said, "I'm sorry, Arthur, such a regrettable thing happened today. Juden and Fabian are heroes of this war. I hope you can mourn." Arthur looked at the 2 brothers who were killed at this time, and finally couldn't help crying, but still shook his head, stood up and said, "They are our pride. It was those damn Death Eaters who caused all this. They will always live in our hearts." Anduin looked at the bodies of the 2 members of the Order of the Phoenix solemnly. They had a lot of injuries on their bodies. The battle lasted for at least half an hour. If they had time to pass on the message, this ending would not have happened. Arthur collected the bodies of the 2 in front of many Aurors, and then asked about what happened. In Moody's mouth, the disaster that happened today was roughly restored. Around noon, a group of Death Eaters attacked Marlene McKinnon's family. At the time, Marlene's family should have put up a corresponding resistance and passed the news to the Prewett brothers. They spent Christmas together last year. The Prewett brothers gave Marlene a 2A mirror as a Christmas gift. Later, after the battle at the Potter's house, the Prewett brothers and Marlene also came to support together. Through the 2A mirror, the Prewett brothers learned of the crisis of Marlene's family. At the time, they made a mistake and did not pass the alarm to other members of the Order of the Phoenix, but came directly to support. Moody's speculation on the situation of Marlene's family at the time was not very clear. It is possible that Marlene's family had been killed at the time, or it is possible that they were still resisting at the time. In short, the situation did not improve after Privet arrived. The two had been resisting the attack tenaciously, but they were still outnumbered and had to retreat to the north. From Fabian, it can be seen that the slight split situation should be that the two tried to uproot to escape, but were interrupted. In the end, the two fled here and were caught up and executed by several Death Eaters. However, the Ministry of Magic detected the abnormality about 10 minutes after the attack on Marlene's house. Although they arrived in time, they were too late to support them. When the strikers and Aurors arrived at the scene, the bodies of the Privet brothers were still warm, but the Death Eaters had all fled. After understanding the general course of events, Arthur nodded, and with a heavy face, he collected the bodies and prepared to take them away for burial. At this time, a woman dressed as an Auror apparated to the crowd. It was Emmeline Vance, whom Anduin had met before. She reported to Barty Crouch. "Sir, McKinnon's family has also arrived at the scene. Alice asked me to come and inform you." "Okay, thank you, Emmeline." Barty Crouch nodded to Emmeline Vance, turned around and said to Arthur and Anduin, "Sorry, I have to leave for a while. I have to go and comfort Marlene's family." After that, Barty Crouch apparated away from the spot. Emmeline Vance, who came here, also greeted Arthur. "I'm sorry, Arthur, to bring you such news today. The Privet brothers have always been our most trusted comrades. I didn't expect it." Arthur shook his head silently to Emily and was about to tell Anduin to leave, but suddenly a white vulture patronus flew in front of Anduin. "This is my mother's patronus. Is there something wrong with Molly?" Frank, who was standing by, recognized his mother's patronus at a glance and spoke. Arthur and Anduin also looked at the patronus nervously, hoping that it was not bad news, but unfortunately, the patronus stopped in front of Anduin and said, "Anduin, are you with Arthur? Molly is too sad, her water broke, and she may give birth early. I have rushed Molly to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. You can come to the hospital directly to find us when you hear the news. I asked Mrs. Ditgory to take care of the children at the burrow." Chapter 80 Difficult Birth. Arthur and Anduin were shocked to hear the news. Moody, who was standing by, also knew the seriousness of the problem and said to Frank, "Frank, you go and help. I will notify Alice. Emmeline and I will help collect the bodies of the Privet brothers. Don't delay." Frank and Arthur nodded and apparated with Anduin. Emmeline Vance, who stayed in the woods, said worriedly, "Oh my God, I hope Molly is okay. So many tragedies have happened today." Arthur and the other two apparated to an old red brick department store. After explaining their purpose to the mannequins in the window of the department store, they passed through the glass in front of them and entered St. Mungo's Hospital. They asked the receptionist in the waiting room and learned that Molly had just been sent here and was now in the ward on the second floor of the hospital. The three of them rushed to the second floor without stopping. Augusta was waiting anxiously in front of the ward. Little Neville was not with him. He must have entrusted Mrs. Ditgory to take care of him. Seeing the arrival of the three people, Augusta hurried forward to explain the situation. It turned out that after the few people left, Augusta notified Mrs. Ditgory, who stayed at home, and the two went to the burrow to take care of Molly. At the time, Molly's condition was fine, but she would cry from time to time. But after a while, the sad Molly was crying, but suddenly she had abdominal pain. After Augusta checked, she found that Molly's amniotic fluid broke, which was a sign of childbirth. Mrs. Ditgory was also panicked at the time and didn't know what to do. However, the decisive Augusta quickly made arrangements. First, she asked Mrs. Ditgory to stay and take care of the children in the room, and then rushed Molly to the hospital. After the therapist in the emergency department saw the two, he reacted very quickly and quickly arranged a ward. Now Molly is being rescued in the ward. Hearing this, Arthur became more nervous. He wanted to rush into the ward to see the situation, but he was afraid of affecting the therapist's work, so he had to frown and pace back and forth anxiously in front of the ward door. After several people waited for a while, the door of the ward finally opened, and a female therapist came out. Several people hurried forward to ask about the situation. The therapist took off her mask and said, "The patient's condition has stabilized. She just drank the potion and her physical strength has recovered, but her amniotic fluid has broken. Now we can only wait for the birth." Anduin asked curiously, "Why not do a cesarean section?" "Cesarean section? What is that?" "The patient has recovered some physical strength now, but she was too sad before and became weak, so the danger is not over yet. All we can do is wait." The therapist didn't understand what Anduin meant, but still told everyone about the current situation. Anduin frowned. He didn't even know how to perform a cesarean section. Wasn't it a mistake? Wouldn't the patient have to endure it? Arthur on the side asked anxiously, "Can I go in and see her? I'm Molly's husband." The therapist thought about it and agreed to let Arthur go in to take a look, but he couldn't stay too long. After Arthur entered the ward, the 3 people outside had to sit on the bench in the corridor and wait quietly. Anduin saw that it was no use wasting time like this, so he suggested to Augusta, "I can accompany Mr. Weasley here. You and Frank should go back to the burrow to help. Mrs. Diggory alone may not be able to take care of so many children." Frank thought about it and said to his mother, "I'd better stay here. Mother, you go back first. I will send a message to Alice later, and I will ask her to help you, so that neither side will be delayed." Augusta thought about it and was a little worried about the burrow. Mrs. Diggory brought Cedric to the burrow to help. Now at Little Neville, there are now 8 children there, and Mrs. Diggory can't even cook, so she nodded and agreed. After Augusta left, Anduin and Frank waited for a while, and Arthur finally came out. He told them that Molly was now awake and her physical strength had recovered a little. She looked mentally okay, but now she had to wait for the birth, and hoped that Molly could hold on. The 3 of them waited quietly outside the ward. The atmosphere was extremely solemn. Anduin had no idea what to do. He was a soldier in his previous life. He knew how to treat emergency treatment and wounds, but he was at a loss when it came to giving birth. They waited until late at night. Arthur went into the ward to talk to Molly every once in a while, but the therapist asked him not to stay too long. There was also news from Augusta that Mrs. Diggory and Cedric had gone back after dinner together. Alice also came to the burrow to help. Everything was normal there. When it was almost dawn in the hospital, there was finally movement in the ward. The 3 people in the corridor could clearly hear Molly's screams of pain. It seemed that she had started giving birth. Arthur paced back and forth anxiously again. The frequent footsteps made Arthur even more irritable. Anduin and Frank could only wait nervously. This lasted for several hours. It was almost dawn on August 11. The shouting in the ward finally stopped, followed by a loud cry of a baby. The faces of the people outside the ward finally relaxed, but Arthur was nervous about Molly again. However, the door of the ward opened soon, and the female therapist walked out and told everyone the good news that the mother and daughter were safe. Looking at Molly holding her daughter, with a face full of both kind maternal love and endless grief, Anduin could not help but remain silent. Happy events and funerals followed one after another, and 2 complex emotions were constantly intertwined in this ward. In the morning, Alice came to the hospital. She asked for leave for herself and Frank from the Aurora office, and the Ministry of Magic also approved leave for Arthur. The Longbottom family was going to take turns to help take care of the Weasley family in the next few days. The Weasley family needed more time to digest the sudden bad news and the joy of the new life. In the next few days, Anduin and Augusta basically stayed in the burrow, and Frank and Alice took turns to look after Molly in the hospital. Anduin mainly helped to cook for the children in the burrow, and Augusta took care of the daily life of the naughty children. The Weasley children, who were usually itchy, have been quiet recently, and even a little disappointed. They haven't seen their mother for several days. Arthur went back to the burrow several times and brought some good news to everyone and the children. Molly recovered quickly and should be able to go home soon. However, the Weasley family's little daughter still needs breast milk, so they can't see their little sister right away. Chapter 81 Memorial Service. That day, Anduin prepared lunch for the Weasley family as usual, and asked Bill to help set the table. Now the children of the Weasley family are very obedient to Anduin. Even Bill, who is only 1 year younger than Anduin, treats him like an elder. Although he always calls Anduin Big Brother, when Anduin gives him a solo job, he is as honest as a baby. "Big Brother Anduin, what delicious food do you want to eat today?" Charlie is the most greedy among the children, and he is the first to go to the table every day. "You will know in a while, call your brothers over quickly." Anduin used the floating spell to command the dishes to be served, and placed them in order on everyone's seat. Augusta and many children sat at the table one after another. Naughty George saw the red burnt ribs on the plate in front of him, and his saliva could not help but stay, and he couldn't help but reach out to grab it. Cough, cough. Anduin coughed twice. George's outstretched hand froze. He had to withdraw his hand awkwardly, then honestly picked up the knife and fork and ate a little bit at a time. He didn't dare to talk nonsense, let alone throw the food around. During this period, the twins were completely obedient to Anduin. They didn't dare to cause any trouble. As long as they made a mistake, Anduin would punish them both by sitting up and packing them up, no matter who did it. Now the two little guys were so honest in front of Anduin. During the lunch break, the door of the burrow was suddenly opened from the outside. Many little ghosts looked at each other, as if they realized something, and climbed down the dining table and rushed to the door. Anduin also came to the door with the children. Sure enough, it was Molly who came back. Molly looked good, holding her little daughter in her arms. Her husband Arthur was by her side, and Frank and Alice were behind her. Finally, after nearly a week of recuperation, Molly went home. Many children surrounded their mother, some shouted "Mom" loudly, some hugged Molly's thighs and cried. Molly used her sad face to comfort her children with a smile. Then Molly also thanked the Longbottom family and Anduin who had been helping. Without their help, she would be sad and worried about these children, which might have broken her mother again. The children finished their lunch in a happy laughter, while the adult wizards and Anduin were thinking about more problems. "We are going to name our little daughter Ginevra Molly Weasley, and her nickname is Ginny." Arthur looked at the newly born child and said to everyone, "Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall also came to visit me. They helped us arrange the funerals of my two brothers. I would like to invite you to come together. Don't worry, I will be strong. Even if it's not for me, it's for Arthur and the children." Molly also said to everyone with a smile. Anduin and the Longbottom family all nodded in agreement. It was definitely not that easy to get out of grief so quickly, but they were still very relieved to see that Molly was able to face life with strength. They did not disturb the Weasley family. They needed to leave themselves more time and space. After helping to finish the lunch of the day, Anduin and the Longbottom family said goodbye to the Weasley family. Anduin also left the burrow amid the reluctant calls of many little kids. Everyone who returned to the Longbottom house continued to live, and Dumbledore also invited them to attend the funeral of the McKinnon family. Perhaps considering Anduin's friendship with the Order of the Phoenix and the fact that he now lived in the Longbottom family, he also invited Anduin. A few days passed, and today was the funeral of the Prewett brothers and Marlene McKinnon. Anduin changed into a dark wizard robe and accompanied several people from the Longbottom family to the cemetery. Since they died in the same battle, the Prewett brothers and Marlene's family discussed and decided to hold a funeral together and bury them separately in the cemetery. Together, they came to a cemetery in southern England. Many people had already arrived here. The Weasley family was collectively dressed in dark plain clothes and stood aside with heavy faces. Next to them should be Marlene McKinnon's relatives. Anduin saw Charles, who was also in a daze with red eyes. After noticing Anduin, the two nodded to each other tacitly. There were also many acquaintances that Anduin knew, such as Emily Vance, whom he had met before, as well as Mad-Eye Moody, Edgar Bones, Kingsley Shacklebolt, Barty Crouch, etc. Anduin also saw Remus Lupin and Peter Pettigrew. Professor McGonagall and Hagrid were also present. They were also members of the Order of the Phoenix, but they usually had to take care of the little wizards at school. It was unknown whether Cyrus and the Potters would show up. Anduin had not seen them for more than half a year. Seeing the Longbottom family arrive, everyone in the cemetery nodded to them, and after approaching, they began to talk in low voices with the people present. Anduin immediately walked towards Professor McGonagall and Hagrid, who was holding a small handkerchief and wiping his tears. "Anduin, I heard from Arthur what you have done for them. Your care and help are gratifying." Professor McGonagall looked at Anduin approaching and nodded. Anduin shook his head gently and said, "Mrs. Weasley is an amazing woman and a great mother, so I am very happy to be able to help them. I don't know how long it will take them to get over the grief." Hagrid cried even more sadly after hearing Anduin's words, and said in a choked voice, "Oh, Marlene and Prewett are such good people, why is God so unfair to them? Maybe death is the beginning of another adventure. What we should do now is not to make the living people suffer more." Anduin sighed and comforted Hagrid. "What wise words, Anduin." A voice came from behind Anduin, but Anduin looked back and found that there was no one there. Just when he felt strange, the air seemed to be revealed, and two familiar figures appeared in front of Anduin. It was James and Lily. "Lily, James, I haven't heard from you for a long time." Anduin saw his two familiar friends and smiled rarely. Lily also smiled and said, "We have been staying in a safe place. Dumbledore has always told us not to contact the outside world easily. We can only come out occasionally using the invisibility cloak. This time, it was the same for attending the funeral. I'm really glad to meet you again, Anduin." Chapter 82 Reunion. So that's it. Looking at the invisible cloak in James's hand, Anduin showed an understanding expression, and asked curiously, "Where is Cyrus? Do you have any news about him?" Will he come back soon? He comes to visit us occasionally. He is one of the few people who know where we live, but we can't contact him. As for whether he will show up today, we don't know." James shook his head slightly and said to Anduin. Then James walked towards his two good friends Lupin and Peter. They haven't seen each other for a long time. Lily also kept greeting the friends around. Most of them didn't know where the Potters had disappeared during this period, but they came forward to greet them when they saw them again. After a while, Dumbledore and Minister Millicent Barnold also came to the cemetery. After nodding and greeting everyone, they began to preside over the funeral and recited eulogies dedicated to the deceased. "Dear friends, today we come together to bid farewell to our relatives, friends, comrades, Marlene McKinnon, Juden Prewett and Fabian Prewett. They have the noblest qualities, kindness, loyalty and bravery. Their death has shocked us. They sacrificed themselves to protect the peace and stability of the wizarding world. Their courage is admirable. I firmly believe that their sacrifice will not be in vain. Their sacrifice has strengthened my determination to fight against the Dark Lord and the Death Eaters. Let us always remember them, and their beliefs will sleep in our hearts." Dumbledore's words made everyone present have red eyes, and sad emotions flowed over the cemetery. Molly, who had been very cheered up in recent days, shed tears again. Then the Minister of Magic Millicent Barnold also expressed condolences to everyone and said that several victims would be posthumously named martyrs. After that, the Weasleys and the McKinnon family also gave speeches. "I hope they can turn grief into strength," Anduin thought. At the funeral ceremony, Anduin also came to Charles, ready to comfort his friend of the same age. However, Charles spoke first. "Anduin, I know, it must be Travs and his men who did it. They have threatened us and my aunt before." The grief-stricken Charles' eyes were red, but Anduin could feel more anger from him at this time. "They will get what they deserve. What you should do now is to calm down." Anduin frowned, thinking that Charles' current state was not right, and reminded him. "I also want to calm down, but I can't do it now. I want to avenge my aunt and others," Charles said hatefully. Then Anduin said something that surprised Charles very much. Anduin said calmly, "Then I support your decision. It is only right to repay a tooth for a tooth and blood for blood." Charles was a little surprised after hearing Anduin's words. In his impression, Anduin was not a person who would say such words. In his impression, Anduin was always afraid of trouble and unwilling to cause trouble, and he was very steady and calm in doing things. Anduin saw Charles looking at him with a very surprised look, and said to him, "It is natural to avenge your family, but since you want to take revenge, you must do it thoroughly, and ensure your own safety, otherwise you'll die before you take revenge." Charles saw that Anduin was actually giving him advice seriously, and he supported his decision so much, and nodded firmly. "Well, take a long-term view, don't think that you can succeed in a short time, you have to be patient, I will come to you to discuss it again, you go to accompany your family first." After Anduin said this calmly, he nodded to Charles and turned away. The reason why Anduin supported Charles' extreme idea so much was mainly because he knew that contradictions could not be resolved out of thin air, and blindly avoiding them would only make people push them further. The easiest way to avoid trouble is to solve the source of the trouble. He didn't solve it before because he was still too weak, but Anduin knew that as a Muggle wizard, he would provoke many enemies out of thin air. "It will take at least a year, Charles, you have to be patient," Anduin muttered coldly. Anduin is a very opinionated person. He has a clear plan for his future and a clear understanding of that pattern of the magic world, but he knows that people without power are not qualified to dominate their own destiny. After attending the funerals of the Weasleys and McKinnons, Anduin began to prepare for the new school year. He went to Diagon Alley to buy school supplies for the new school year and customized new clothes. Anduin grew up very fast. He is now nearly 1.6 meters tall and his muscles are stronger. The original school uniform is a bit crowded. At the same time, he also purchased a lot of potion materials and potion bottles. It is not good to always pull the wool of his den and greenhouse. Other condiments and the like are also supplemented in large quantities. In the last few days before school enrollment, Anduin would visit the Weasley family at the Burrow from time to time. At present, Molly's mental state has recovered well, and the Burrow has gradually returned to the scene of laughter and joy before. The new school year was about to begin. Anduin packed his luggage early in the morning, had a hearty breakfast with the Longbottom family, and then went to King's Cross Station with Frank. Frank was patrolling King's Cross Station today. They had to cast a shielding spell around platform 9 3/4 and drive away the Muggles around. If a muggle accidentally saw a wizard passing through the wall, they had to help erase his memory. I'll take you here. I wish you a happy new school year. If you don't have anywhere to go this Christmas, you're still welcome in our home. Frank and Alice had formed a deep friendship with Anduin during this summer vacation. Anduin's good cooking skills had completely conquered their stomachs. Anduin also nodded to Frank and said, I'll seriously consider it. Your job is very dangerous. Don't be stubborn and be sure to pay attention to safety. Frank smiled and nodded, and said goodbye to Anduin at the platform. Anduin passed through the wall between platforms 9 and 10 alone. Seeing the red train spewing thick steam after a long absence, Anduin couldn't help but feel a little melancholy. Many of the things that happened during this holiday were still vivid in his mind. Walking straight forward along the train platform, there were already many wizards who came to send their children to school. Chapter 83 Invitation. At this time, by coincidence, a group of wizards gathered together again, and they seemed to be arguing about something. Anduin looked closely and saw that it was another confrontation between the McKinnon family and the Travs family. Well, it happens every year, right? But this time Anduin did not watch from a distance, but moved closer. He wanted to take a closer look at the Travs family. He did not dare to get too close, and stopped to observe about 20 meters away from the crowd. The adult wizards on both sides of the confrontation did not pay much attention to the little wizard who came closer, but Sample Travs and Charles noticed him. Charles nodded slightly at Anduin, while Travs stared at Anduin with a sinister look. He had not forgotten the humiliation he suffered last school year, but Anduin was elusive all day long, and he could not be found even in the common room. In addition to Sample, there were 3 other people in the Travs family. One of them was a very dazzling woman with long golden hair. Next to her should be her husband, Sample's father, who had a very eye-catching goatee, but his face was a little pale and he didn't look very healthy. Behind that 2 of them was a guy with a gloomy face, with a sinister smile on his face, staring coldly at the McKinnon family. The McKinnon family also stared at the man behind them, cursing him as a murderer, as if they were ready to fight at any time. Anduin took a rough look and understood the situation. The man and woman should be Sample's parents, and the man behind him should be Sample's uncle. Charles had heard that guy was a Death Eater before, but because there was no evidence, the Ministry of Magic couldn't arrest him openly. I didn't expect him to dare to run around King's Cross Station. Sample, who had been staring at Anduin, took the initiative to approach his uncle and whispered something in his uncle's ear. Then the gloomy Travs moved his eyes to Anduin, constantly looking at something. Seeing the guy who seemed to be a Death Eater looking at him, Anduin couldn't help but sneer, squinting his eyes and looking at the man carefully. Orals came to maintain order soon and forcibly pulled the people on both sides apart. They experienced this scene almost once a year. Although they had their colleagues at the McKinnon family, it was not easy for them to explain if they fought directly in public. Anduin did not approach them. After observing them at a certain distance, he turned back and walked onto the train. It was not wise to have a conflict in advance. He found an empty carriage to sit down. The crowd confronting on the platform was also dispersed by the Aurors. After a while, Charles also walked into the carriage. Did you see it just now? Those arrogant guys, they must be the murderers of my aunt. Charles said to Anduin angrily as soon as he sat down. When Anduin saw Charles coming in, he took out his wand and cast a shielding spell on the carriage, then said to Charles, I saw it, and I can basically conclude from their expressions that they don't have any psychological burden for their evil deeds. Charles then said excitedly, I won't let them go. Sample is not a good guy either. When we get to Hogwarts, I will make him pay. Will you help me, Anduin? Anduin looked at Charles with bloodshot eyes, and said calmly, I think what you should do is to protect yourself first. Sample doesn't look like a quiet guy. If you act rashly, you will be the only one who suffers. Then are you just going to let me watch those guys get away with it? Charles excitedly danced and shouted at Anduin. Anduin took out a bottle of tranquilizer and handed it to Charles, then said, Drink this first, you are not in a good condition now. Let me give you an example. For example, when you arrive at Hogwarts, that Sample comes up to challenge you and says he wants to duel with you. What should you do? Then I will let him have a good taste of the new weevil curse I learned. Charles said while waving his spell fiercely, and then took a sip of the potion handed to him by Anduin. Anduin looked at Charles speechlessly. You are such an honest genius. In that case, you will be fooled. He will lead you to a dark corner and call a group of people to beat you up. You don't think he will really duel with you openly? Anduin said coldly. Then what do you say I should do? Should I just stand there on watch? I'm not convinced. Charles calmed down a little after drinking the tranquilizer. His words were not as fierce as before, but he still said it angrily. There is only one thing you should do, and that is to become stronger. The pure blood faction of Slytherin is very united. If you are not sure to deal with those senior students, it is not a good idea to jump in front of them rashly. Anduin advised Charles. But I am only 12 years old. By the way, you should be very strong, Anduin. I heard from my aunt before that you once helped them resist the Death Eaters. Do you have any ideas? The reason why Charles trusted Anduin so much was mainly because he knew that although Anduin was a Slytherin, Anduin's behavior proved that he was not on the same side as the Death Eaters. Anduin looked at Charles helplessly and said, "Well, do you know Hagrid's hut? It is after passing the school-covered bridge, turn left at the circular stone pile and walk to the end. Isn't that the way to the Forbidden Forest? Is that the forbidden area of the school?" Charles asked puzzledly. "I usually stay there. You can come to me after class every day. I will help you train. Sometimes, tolerance is not because of weakness, but to have a greater chance of winning when you take action," Anduin explained to Charles. Under the influence of the potion, Charles' mood gradually stabilized. After thinking about it, he nodded seriously. Soon, the door of the carriage was opened again, and Vivian walked in. As if nothing could disturb her good mood, she smiled and greeted the two people in the carriage. Charles also greeted Vivian and said goodbye to Anduin, then walked out of the carriage and went to find his Gryffindor companions. "What were you talking about just now, so mysterious?" Vivian asked while putting her luggage away. "Nothing, he said he likes you and doesn't know whether he should confess to you." Anduin teased Vivian. Hearing Anduin's words, Vivian's face turned red and she said, "What are you boys thinking about? Are you crazy?" Anduin listened to Vivian's incoherent words. This guy wouldn't take it seriously, right? Never mind. If Charles asks me about it, I will never admit it. Chapter 84 Bones, Professor. Anduin didn't know what kind of misunderstanding Vivian had with his teasing. Anyway, on the train, Vivian kept asking Anduin about Charles. After a long journey, the train finally arrived at Hogwarts. They were no longer in the first grade, so they didn't need to take a boat to went to the school. After getting off the train, they walked in another direction, where a carriage was waiting for them. "I said, I was joking with you. Charles didn't confess to you. I was teasing you." Anduin felt that he was going crazy. Vivian kept talking about Charles in a roundabout way on the way, and now he didn't believe it no matter how he explained. "Humph, you are still lying to me. You must be giving Charles some tricks again. Don't think I don't know, otherwise why would he turn around and run away when he saw me? Tell him that if he has anything to say, he can just tell me himself, and he doesn't need you to be the messenger." Vivian has now completely fallen into her own fantasy. In her imagination, Charles is a timid guy who doesn't even dare to confess. When walking towards the carriage parking area, they ran into Charles. Vivian glared at him fiercely, which made Charles confused, wondering how he had offended this little girl again. Anduin stared at the carriage that was picking up people. In front of the carriage stood a black, skinny Pegasus. "What's wrong with you? Why are you staring at the air? Get in the car," Vivian said to Anduin unhappily. Since Anduin witnessed the death of Evan Rosier last Christmas, he could see magical creatures such as the Thestrals. Every time he saw this creature, he couldn't help but look at it twice, wondering when he could touch it. Anduin used to see some Thestrals that accidentally broke into the Forbidden Forest at Hagrid's place. Hagrid also explained to him the characteristics of the Thestrals. Only wizards who had witnessed death could see this creature. They were invisible to others. There was a community of Thestrals in the Forbidden Forest. Putting aside his curiosity about the Thestrals, Anduin took a carriage back to Hogwarts School. In the Great Hall, he watched the new students begin the sorting ceremony again. He always felt that the sorting hat seemed to like to glance at him, so he couldn't help but glare at the hat. After the sorting ceremony, Dumbledore began his speech, which was still very brief, and introduced this year's new Defensor Against the Dark Arts professor to all the students. Unfortunately, Professor Rob, who was in charge of teaching the Defensor Against the Dark Arts class last year, passed away due to his old age after the end of the school year. It is very admirable that he was able to take over the teaching work at such an old age. At the same time, I will introduce this year's Defensor Against the Dark Arts professor, Mr. Edgar Bones. Dumbledore said in a slow tone. Did the old man really die of old age last year? Last school year, Anduin had been worried about the old professor's health. He always trembled during lectures, as if he would collapse in class at any time. After persevering through the semester, Anduin wanted to praise the old professor for his good health, but he died just after the end of the semester. However, Anduin saw a familiar figure again. Wasn't that Edgar Bones, one of the founders of the Order of the Phoenix? When he stayed at Lily's house, he often heard Lily talk about this gentleman. It seemed that he was a master of spells and runes. Unexpectedly, he was invited by Dumbledore to be a professor at Hogwarts. Was it to strengthen the security of Hogwarts? Edgar Bones, who stood up and signaled to everyone, also saw Anduin. He had a good impression of this young wizard who he had only met a few times, so he nodded slightly in his direction. Anduin also smiled and nodded to Professor Bones. After the opening dinner, Anduin began his secluded college life again. On this day, Anduin finished the first defense against the dark arts class of the new school year. Mr. Bones' teaching level was obviously much higher than that of the old professor of the previous school year. The class was humorous and the content of the explanation was also very popular, so that students could quickly understand the content of the textbook. The students obviously liked this new professor very much, and the class atmosphere was quite active. After the class, Professor Bones called Anduin. Bones looked very rough, and his beard looked very masculine, but his tone of voice was very gentle. Anduin, I met Lily before coming to Hogwarts. She said that you have a high talent and interest in runes and spells, right? Anduin looked at Professor Bones in front of him and said modestly, "You are too kind." That's because Lily's guidance level is very high. I'm indeed very interested in runes. Recently, I have been thinking about developing a new rune, but the progress is not ideal. Oh? Bones didn't know how Anduin's learning progress was. Hearing that he had even started to try to combine new spells, he immediately became interested. He was invited by Dumbledore to come to Hogwarts this year, mainly because Dumbledore needed to spend a lot of time outside the school in order to prevent Voldemort from reaching out to the school. The Order of the Phoenix had just suffered a major loss, so he entrusted Bones to help. Because he was afraid of Voldemort's curse on the defense against the dark arts class, he was not going to teach the entire school year and planned to leave early before the end of the semester. Most members of the Order of the Phoenix knew about going to Hogwarts. Before coming, Lily had asked Bones to take care of Anduin in the academy. She knew that Bones was a rune master. If he could give Anduin some advice, Anduin would definitely avoid many detours. Since you are so interested in spells, come to me when you have time. Although my level is also average, I have studied spells for more than 10 years after all. I believe I won't let you down. How about starting tonight? Bones said very modestly. Anduin was overjoyed when he heard this. He knew that Bones wanted to give him a special meal under Lily's care, so he quickly agreed. He didn't expect that there would be a surprise at the beginning of the new school year. That night, Anduin, who had just finished dinner, knocked on the door of Bones' office with great interest. Bones opened the door and looked at Anduin and smiled. "You came very early. I'm sorry that I haven't finished my dinner yet. You may have to wait for me for a while." Anduin said embarrassedly, "I'm sorry, Professor Bones, I was only thinking about learning runes and didn't pay attention to the time." Bones let Anduin into the office without caring. There was a tray on Bones' desk, and only half of the food on it had been eaten. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novel, as there you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 85 Test. Bones asked Anduin to sit for a while, and then he continued to eat his dinner. After Anduin found a place to sit, he began to look at the decoration of the office. At a glance, Anduin saw a fully functional rune workbench, which looked more advanced than the one in Lily's house. There were 3 rows of crystal balls for testing. Bones saw Anduin staring at his rune table, as if he knew what it was. He was a little surprised. "You know, this is a device that only scholars who specialize in spells will buy, and a set costs thousands of gold galleons. Do you know that workbench?" Bones asked. "Yes, I stayed at Lily's house last Christmas, and there was also a rune workbench there. I also started learning runes there. Yours looks more advanced than Lily's." Anduin said truthfully. "I see, it seems that your progress is faster than I thought. So how are you learning runes now?" Bones asked curiously. "Now, I'll use this." Anduin took out the rune disc from his linen space bag. He would keep this kind of valuable item with him every time he used it. It should be said that he would carry all his wealth with him almost every day. Oh? Bones raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect Anduin to have this thing. Although it was not as valuable as the workbench, it was not available everywhere. A rune disc also cost hundreds of gold galleons. This was given to me by James and Lily. There is also a magic book containing runes. I have basically learned all the runes in it. Now I am mainly learning those flat runes and trying to disassemble and combine runes. Anduin said with a smile. Bones couldn't help but improve Anduin's evaluation again. You know, this child is only in the 2nd grade. Generally, he will start learning ancient runes in the 3rd grade, but Anduin has mastered so much knowledge before the 3rd grade. It shouldn't be. There are many hard conditions for learning to apply runes. Bones was thinking about something, and had some guesses in his mind. Then he quickly finished his dinner, wiped his mouth, and walked to Anduin. Anduin, try to catch this. Bones said, and opened his right hand. A small ball of light appeared from the palm of his hand, and then he gently pushed it, and the small ball of light floated towards Anduin. Seeing this, Anduin mobilized the magic power in his body, stretched out his hand and grabbed the small ball of light, and Anduin could feel that the ball of light had no temperature, but the magic power contained in it was much stronger than the normal fluorescent flash, but the brightness was not as bright as the fluorescent flash. Therefore, Anduin couldn't help but exclaim "Her!" Bones was shocked to see Anduin easily controlling the light ball. Hearing Anduin's hum, he asked, "What's wrong? Is there anything wrong?" "Yes, when I sensed this light ball, I found that the magic contained in it was very strong, but the brightness was lower than that of the general fluorescent spell." Anduin said honestly. "Can you sense the magic contained in the spell?" Bones asked a little unbelievingly. Then Bones lit up another light ball, which was much brighter than the previous one, and then asked, "Feel this one." Anduin followed his instructions and reached out to hold the light ball. After carefully sensing it, he was surprised and said, "The magic content of this light ball is lower than the previous one, but the brightness is very high. How did you do that? How did you do that? I also want to ask you, how did you manage to sense external magic so easily? It is basically impossible for someone at this age to do that." Bones' face was calm, but a huge wave of emotion surged in his heart. He wondered, could this child not be a human? Was he some other humanoid creature? Anduin didn't know that he was labeled as not human again. He just thought that this magic skill was very interesting. He kept weighing the light balls in his hands and tried to use magic to invade the inside of the light balls. Soon, the brighter light ball became unstable after being affected by the external magic, and then it flashed and went out. The other darker one persisted for a while before slowly going out. So this skill can increase stability. Less magic but high brightness, short duration, poor stability, more magic but low brightness, long duration, strong stability, Anduin concluded in his heart. Bones watched Anduin use his superb magic controller to ravage the 2 light balls he created. Although he couldn't believe it in his heart, the talent of this little wizard was much more exaggerated than what Lily said. "Anduin, come and sit down, let's talk." Bones pointed to the table in front of his desk. After both of them sat down, Bones said softly, "Do you know why I caught the 2 light balls for you just now?" Anduin thought for a moment and replied, "You want to test my understanding of runes and magic. One of the 2 light balls has more magic injected into it and reduced power consumption, which means it has reduced brightness, but it is much more stable. The other one is just the opposite." Bones was speechless. "It's not that complicated. Are you thinking too much?" So he said to Anduin, "No, I just want to see if you can catch that light ball. Only if you have strong control over your own magic can you easily hold the light ball. Ordinary underage wizards either crush the light ball directly or can't catch it at all. As for the other one, I only adjusted the magic ratio in rune structure when you said you could sense the magic in it, so that you could try to sense it. I didn't expect you to really be able to sense the external magic." Anduin realized that something was wrong and said, "Is there anything abnormal in my performance?" "That's too abnormal," Bones complained in his heart, and explained. "Yes, I heard Professor Flitwick say that you joined his spell club. You should have heard that the magic stability of underage wizards is very poor and not easy to control." Anduin then remembered the conversation with Professor Flitwick last year, and it seemed that there was such a saying, so he nodded to Bones. Bones also nodded and said, Yes, generally speaking, learning runes and spells requires strong magic control, because runes, especially experimental application runes, are very delicate work. If the control is slightly poor, accidents are easy to occur. And many young wizards have physiological problems. It is difficult to fully control their magic when they are young. Therefore, ancient runes will only be offered as an elective course after the 3rd grade. That is because on the one hand, this course is very difficult. On the other hand, after the 3rd grade, underage wizards will strengthen their control over their own magic. If there are young wizards who want to try to study and research runes in depth, it is easier to get started than lower grade wizards. Chapter 86 Talisman Development. I see. Anduin nodded and said, so that's why you were testing my magic control. Bones affirmed, yes, you control your magic very well. It should be said that it is far better than students of the same age or even higher than you. What's more rare is that your magic perception is so good. Have you heard of the term magic sensitivity? Anduin nodded and said, Professor Flitwick explained to me that my magic sensitivity is the result of long-term training. It is for this reason that Professor Flitwick allowed me to join his spell club. Bones nodded in sudden enlightenment. It seems that he was right. Magic sensitivity directly affects the ability to control and perceive magic. No wonder this little wizard has such an exaggerated perception. Then another question arose in his mind. Can sensitivity be trained? Bones was going to ask Professor Flitwick when he had time, but at this time he still changed the topic back on track and said, since you know this, and you were very good at it, you can even try silent spells or Wandle's casting. These are skills that can only be mastered after high sensitivity. When Anduin heard Professor Bones talking about silent and Wandle's casting, he pointed to the ink bottle in front of the two of them, and the ink bottle slowly floated up. Bones almost suffocated himself before he finished his sentence, and at the same time he was surprised that Anduin could already skillfully cast silent and Wandle's spells. He couldn't help but feel excited. You know, wizards with experience in silent casting are good seedlings for learning spells. It seems that you know more than I thought. Well, I basically understand your current situation. Bones said, and took out 2 books from his drawer, and then said, these 2 books should be of great help to you. Anduin took a look. One of them was 49 spells disassembly and combination formulas, which was a very thick 4-page book. It would take a long time to read it all. The other one was collected rune literature, which was also an extremely thick book. Thank you, Professor. Anduin happily accepted the 2 books. These 2 books alone were worth the trip. With your current level, many books that explain theoretical content can no longer help you. What you need more are reference books that provide practical guidance. Bones paused, then continued, before we officially begin, I want to know if you have your own research direction in learning spells. Is it in the direction of spells, or in the direction of alchemy? Anduin tilted his head and thought for a while, then said, is there any difference? Bones smiled slightly, and said, the 2 research directions are actually similar, but there are still some differences. If you focus on the direction of spells, then it involves the development, optimization, restoration, disassembly, translation, and casting of spells. There are a lot of complex academic contents involved, and you need to study magical phonetics. Of course, you have experience in silent and Wandle's casting, so you can skip this part, but if you want to pass on newly developed spells or optimized old spells, then the translation of spells is essential. For example, my previous research direction was disassembly, restoration and optimization. I don't have much experience in developing new spells, but I do have some experience in optimizing spells, or disassembling unfamiliar runes and identifying the runes inside. Anduin nodded slightly, remembering what Lily once said, that Mr. Bones seemed to have disassembled and restored an ancient rune. Then Bones said, if you want to try alchemy, I also have some knowledge, but alchemy does not involve spell translation. It requires more knowledge of spell development, optimization, enchantment, engraving technology, materials science, etc. And you also need to know some manual work. Among them, stable hands, spatial sense, and patience are the 3 most important qualities for alchemists. Strong spatial sense. The other Anduin could understand, but what does spatial sense mean? Many spells need to be engraved inside magical materials, and many materials are not completely flat. Any bending or deformation of the material may cause the talisman to have errors. If it just fails, it's not a big deal. Many alchemists have been killed because of errors in engraving rooms when testing alchemical items. Bones explained. So that's how it is. It just requires 3-dimensional imagination. Anduin nodded in understanding and said, I'm very interested in alchemy, but I also have ideas about the development and optimization of spells. Recently, I've been studying a project in the spell club, and I plan to develop a sonic spell. Bones nodded and said, the combination of spells is ever-changing. Whether it's spells or alchemy, development and optimization are the most important links. Let's start here. Then Bones took Anduin to the room table in the office and said, you have already mastered a lot of theoretical knowledge. Let's start directly from practice. Show me the sonic runes you are researching now, and then tell me your ideas. Yes. Anduin operated the room table skillfully, and Bones on the side nodded frequently. It seems that he must have spent a lot of time on it. My idea is to develop an echolocation spell. That's what I'm calling it for now. It's inspired by bats. Bats make a scream when they fly. This is an ultrasonic signal with a very high frequency that humans can't hear. If these ultrasonic signals hit other objects on their flight path, they will immediately reflect back and locate the object. Bones was stunned after hearing Anduin's idea, because he didn't understand what it meant at all. Anduin didn't observe Bones' expression and asked his own question. The base rune I use is the control rune, and I found that all sound spells have the control rune as the underlying rune. Why is that? Bones understood this question, and then he explained to Anduin. In fact, it's not just the sound wave runes. Basically, most ordinary spells use the control rune as the base rune, such as the levitation spell, the obstacle spell, etc. This rune means to master, control, and guide. And other spells that change the actual form of an object, such as the shrinkage spell, the extension spell, and of course the transfiguration spell, all use the change rune as the base rune. This rune means transformation, change, and conversion. Chapter 87 Change of Thinking. For example, many spells that need to release elements, such as clear water like a spring, burning flames, etc. all use the element rune as the base. You can combine other runes with the base runes according to what effect you want the spell to have. So that's how it is. In other words, spells that do not change the form of objects basically use control, spells that change the form use change, and elemental spells use element, right? Are there other types? Anduin asked curiously. Of course there are. Many memory magics use the mind rune, and many black magics, such as the unforgivable curse, use the soul rune. Soul-related magic is very complex and profound, and it is difficult to develop counter-spells and anti-spells. This is one of the reasons why this type of magic is banned. Bones introduced in detail. After solving the doubts in his heart, Anduin continued to explain his ideas to Professor Bones. After I used control as the basis, I considered that this spell needs to send out sound waves first, and then retract the sound waves, and try to achieve the positioning effect through factors such as the time interval and direction of receiving the sound waves, so I combined the runes such as sound, emission, sensing, and presentation. Oh? Then show me the rune combination you imagined. Bones heard that Anduin already had enough practical ideas, so he wanted to see how the progress was by observing the rune combination. Okay, Professor. Anduin skillfully mobilized the required runes and combined them according to the previous progress. Professor Bones' rune table included a lot of runes and runes, so there was no situation where any words were missing when combining. Bones looked at the combined runes and said to Anduin with a smile, "Have you tried this spell? You have good magic control, so you should have tried it. What is the effect?" Anduin nodded and said, "Indeed I tried it, but after casting the spell just buzzed. It was useless except for making noise, and I didn't receive any echo feedback. What do you think is the reason?" Bones said, "My spell is to simulate ultrasound, which requires higher frequency sound waves. I think it is because the sound wave frequency is not enough." Anduin expressed his thoughts. "I think I understand what you mean, but you made a mistake in this spell," Bones said as he observed Anduin's spell. "Where?" Anduin's heart moved. "Sure enough, professionals are different. Here." Bones pointed to a place on Anduin's rune and said, "Is there a problem with the present rune?" Anduin asked puzzled. Bones nodded and said, "Yes, your idea is to emit high-frequency sound waves and then receive them, and then detect the surrounding environment for you. Is that right? How far can you imagine the range?" Anduin thought for a moment and said, "Ultrasonic waves are very fast and stable. They should be able to sense at least 100-meter radius. If they are optimized with runes and some spell-casting techniques, they should have no problem detecting situations within a 1,000-meter range. Such a wide range." Bones was secretly surprised. Although he didn't know what the ultrasonic waves Anduin was talking about were, if a detection spell with such a large range could be developed, the application prospects would be very broad. The supersensory spell, which is also a perception magic, has a perception range of only about tens of meters at his level. Bones nodded secretly in his heart, then said to Anduin, "Okay, have you ever thought about how to present such a large detection range after receiving it, with your ears or your eyes? If it is attached to the eyes, it may interfere with your own vision." Anduin was stunned when he heard this. Indeed, he had a good idea. Where should the received sound waves be transmitted? The ears certainly can't do it. The eyes can, but if the eyes are full of sound wave patterns, it will even interfere with normal vision. What if he accidentally blinds himself when testing the spell? Moreover, Anduin envisioned this echolocation as a 360-degree reconnaissance mode without blind spots, while the eyes can only see in one direction. Bones looked at Anduin, who was in deep thought, and explained to him, "Actually, your idea is very good. This spell has good application prospects. Its biggest function should be to detect the situation behind bunkers or obstacles, or in environments with poor visibility, such as woods, right?" Anduin nodded and said, "Yes, and I imagine that it can also observe people who use the disillusionment spell wearing visibility cloaks." Oh? Bones hadn't thought of this, but it increased the value of the spell, so he continued to explain, "I will provide you with two ideas. The first is to transmit the feedback to your mind. In that case, you can directly present the environment within the range of the spell in your mind. I remember that there is a similar application in the Rune of Legislative Thoughts, but the development difficulty is very high and the risk of the experiment is also very high, so I don't recommend you to do this. The second is to change your thinking and disassemble your spell. You can try to receive and present information with the help of alchemical props, such as a mirror or a pair of glasses. The spell sends out the ultrasonic wave, and then it is received by the alchemical prop. This is safe and the difficulty of developing the spell is also low." "I see, then I am willing to accept the second method." Anduin thought for a while and replied. Sure enough, experienced scholars have clear ideas. Anduin thought silently. "Well, let's stop here today. You need to do what I said, and you still need to learn a lot of things, including material science and enchantment science. I will explain these contents to you next." Coming out of Professor Bones' office, it was already past curfew. Anduin thought about it and decided to go back to the Slytherin dormitory to rest today. While walking to the basement, Anduin recalled what he had learned today. Professor Bones is worthy at being a master of spells. The amount of information he gained today is richer than what he has been self-studying. Just as he walked and thought to the third floor, Anduin suddenly heard a rustling sound behind him. When he turned around, he saw two dark shadows hitting him. He instinctively cast a barrier to repel the two shadows, only to see the shadows explode immediately after hitting the obstacle, and a foul smell hit his face. Dung bombs? Anduin kept moving the air around him to blow away the filth and stench, then quickly hid behind a nearby stone pillar, looking for the attacker, but the attacker had already run away. Who could it be who attacked me right after school started? It's probably Trav's gang, using dung bombs. How childish, Anduin thought with a frown. Chapter 88 Sneak Attack. I'm not ready to attack you, but you're provoking me first. Do you really think I'm easy to bully? While Anduin was thinking, a voice came from the other side. Who is making trouble again? You can't run away, you little bastard. It was Filch's voice. Anduin saw that he was blocked by the stains of the dung bomb on one side and Filch on the other side. After thinking for a while, he decisively jumped over the stone fence in the corridor and jumped downstairs. Then he quickly moved to the corridor downstairs by constantly generating barriers under his feet. It seems that they know Filch is on the other side and want to block me in the middle of the corridor. Either I will be caught by Filch or I will have to run through the stains of the dung bomb. So they are likely to be hiding at the other end now, trying to sneak attack me when I run in their direction. Anduin quickly analyzed the situation on the scene based on the information he had collected so far. He was not the kind of person who would walk away in disgrace after being beaten. Since he knew where the attackers might appear, he would go back and deal with them. At the other end of the corridor on the third floor covered with dung bomb stains, Travs and 3 other Slytherin second-year students were indeed hiding there. If Anduin ran in this direction to avoid Filch, he would pass by the place where several people were ambushing. Coincidentally, Travs was originally passing by the trophy display room on the 4th floor with Rosia and 2 other pure blood classmates, and happened to see Anduin's figure with his head down and thinking. Travs had always wanted to seek revenge on Anduin, but Anduin had always been elusive. Usually, he couldn't stop him in that common room. Today, he had a narrow road to meet his enemy. At the same time, he saw Filch patrolling to the 3rd floor soon, so there was this sudden attack. Okay, that guy must have been caught by Filch. Let's run quickly, or we will be caught soon. Rosier, who was beside Travs, looked around nervously and advised Travs. At first, when Rosier heard that Travs was going to attack Anduin, he advised him not to do so. As a result, Travs was so confident that he took out the dumb bomb on his body and attacked Anduin. As a result, Anduin blocked it without even taking out his wand. Now he is still thinking of ambushing at the corner. Rosier felt that he would not have a good result. What are you afraid of? Let's wait a little longer. Although that guy was not hit by the gun bomb, Filch has blocked that end. If he wants to run, he must run in our direction. He may be hiding in the classroom next to the corridor. When he is driven out by Filch, we will attack together and teach this mudblood a lesson. Travs sneered and whispered to the people around him. However, after waiting for a while, they still did not see Anduin passing by. Filch's angry shouting and cursing could be heard from the other side. It seems that he has searched the nearby classrooms and is about to come in this direction. Did the guy really disappear out of thin air? He couldn't have jumped down the corridor. Filch's voice was getting closer and closer. Rosier and 2 classmates beside him kept urging Travs. He could only retreat unwillingly. Let's go. We'll find a chance to deal with him next time. Let's retreat from this side. Travs shouted unwillingly and led a few people to leave in the opposite direction. There was a staircase in the tower in the other direction to go down. Just as they walked down the stairs on the other side to the 2nd floor, Travs heard a few ouch sounds, and then the 2 companions beside him fell heavily to the ground. Before he could see what was going on, a swift magic spell flew out from the shadow in the corner and hit him hard. In an instant, Travs was knocked away, hit the wall next to him, and fell heavily again. After landing, Travs was completely unconscious. Rosier, who was next to him, was frightened by this scene and his legs went weak. He sat down directly on the ground, and then saw a person walking out from the shadow next to him. It was Anduin. As soon as Rosier saw Anduin, he immediately got scared and shouted at him, No, it's not me, it's all Travs's fault. I tried to persuade him, but it was useless. Seeing Rosier so scared, Anduin felt bored too. He smiled slightly and walked forward, groping the 3 people who had fainted. He soon found a few money bags and counted the amount. There were more than 30 gold galleons, which was a good harvest. Don't worry, Rosier. I'm so happy that you can bring them to give me money. I have to thank you. Look, now your 3 months of protection fee will be paid, right? Anduin said to Rosier with a smile. Rosier's face suddenly turned bitter. Why did he make it seem like I was the one who led these guys here? Anduin came to Rosier, pulled him up, gently patted the dust off his body, and said, Okay, I know you don't have the courage to mess with me, but there are conditions for not being targeted by me, and this money is part of it. Anduin shook the purse in his hand, and then continued, Has your family made any moves recently? And have you heard anything about Travs? No, my family has already thought about changing its attitude after Evan's death, and now its position has moved closer to the neutral faction. Now it is the first priority to protect ourselves, but we dare not openly defy the Dark Lord. Travs has been getting close to senior quick wilds in the 4th grade recently. I don't know anything else. Rosier said to Anduin incoherently. Very good, I will let you go again this time, just go back and say that you escaped from my hands. Anduin smiled coldly, ignored Rosier, and walked away from him directly. Even if I keep getting into trouble every day, it turns out that class conflicts are basically impossible to resolve. It seems that I have to speed up the process. After thinking about it, Anduin quickly returned to the Slyring dormitory. He couldn't care about what happened to those guys lying there. The next day, Anduin heard from Vivian about the follow-up of last night. Rosier was really cowardly. He didn't even dare to run. He could only lie on the ground and pretend to be dead. Then the 4 of them were caught by Filch. Filch directly put the blame on them for throwing dung bombs. It was said that after being woken up last night, they were forced by Filch to clean up the stains until midnight, and they were also punished to be locked up for a month. Recently, the disputes in the magic world have become more and more intense, causing the Slyring purebloods in the school to start pulling people to stand in line. Although Vanessa is already the president of the female student union, she still can't suppress those guys. Now in Slytherin College, if students choose not to stand in line, they will also be targeted. In recent days, Anduin has felt that many people look at him with malicious eyes. Chapter 89 Training. After all, he was a Muggle wizard, and was sorted into Slytherin, so it was easy for him to enter the vision of those who advocated the supremacy of pure blood. However, after a school year of closed-door training, Anduin was not very afraid, but now he needed to add some more trump cards. After thinking for a long time, Anduin made a decision to move directly to the Forbidden Forest Lodge, so as to reduce the chance of conflict with those pure blood factions. After moving out of the dormitory, Anduin still insisted on practicing spells and studying spell knowledge every day, and then went to Professor Bones to study spells at night. This day, Anduin was reading Aggregate Runology in his small room. This book introduced a lot of knowledge about optimizing spells by adjusting the structure of magic runes. Anduin also found a way to increase and decrease the frequency of sound waves. But just as Anduin was reading with relish, his door was knocked. After opening the door of the hut, he found Charles at the door. Anduin smiled and said, "You are here. It seems that your reason has overcome your impulse." Charles was allowed into the room by Anduin. He looked at the furnishings in the hut and asked curiously, "Are you living here now?" "Yes, Slytherin College is not peaceful now. All the students are forced to take sides by the pure bloods, but they will definitely not let me go. Instead of continuing to live in the dormitory and giving them the opportunity to find trouble, it is better to jump out and accumulate strength," Anduin said with a smile. Charles said angrily, "I didn't expect that those bastards would not even let go of their classmates in the college. What about Vivian? She must hate those guys too. She comes from a big family. Although she is a mixed blood, she won't be in any trouble. Besides, senior sister Vanessa will protect those girls," Anduin said. Charles nodded and said, "That's good. I've thought about it and feel that I'm still too weak. Recently, there have been some conflicts between our college and Slytherin College, but I can't help at all. You have more ideas and I'm willing to listen to you. Tell me what I should do." Anduin took out a piece of paper from the drawer of his desk and said to Charles, "I have planned a training plan for you. You'll have to undergo special training in the next period of time." Charles took the parchment and looked at it, then frowned and asked, "Running? What kind of special training is this? Even if you want to train, shouldn't you practice spells?" Anduin patted Charles's slightly thin body and said, "Your physique is not strong enough, which will affect your reaction ability. Strengthening your physical fitness can also activate the magic in your body, so that the effect of practicing spells will be better. At the same time, continuous exercise can strengthen your will, and a strong will can increase the strength of magic. These are what I have concluded over the years." Without waiting for Charles to say anything, he continued, "You must get up early every morning. I will take you running and train your physical fitness. After class, you will come to my place and start endurance training and spell casting practice for magic. You must be mentally prepared. This is not easy." Charles shook his head and said, "I'm not afraid of hard work. As long as I can become stronger, I can persist." Anduin looked at Charles' determination and nodded. As one of the few friends of the same age who had the idea of making progress, Anduin naturally supported him very much, but that still depended on whether he had enough determination. "Okay, now let's start the spell extension training. This is a training method I developed myself. It can strengthen your control and perception of magic," Anduin said. Then Anduin took a large basin of water, controlled the basin to fly over Charles' head, and said to Charles, "Now cast a spell on it. Use the floating spell." Charles had never heard of the training method Anduin mentioned, but he did it anyway. However, he couldn't cast spells silently and without a wand like Anduin, so he had to take out his wand to cast spells. "Okay, what you need to do next is to maintain the current state of casting spells, and then persist as long as possible. Try to feel the flow of magic in your body, and try to save magic." Anduin told Charles the key points of training. "Then what?" Charles stared at the big basin above his head nervously. He was a little too strong at the beginning, and he had never cast a spell on such a heavy object. Then just wait, I will see how much magic power you have. Hold on, continuous casting can help you improve your control over magic." Anduin sat leisurely in the chair next to Charles and continued to flip through the book. Charles persisted for 5 or 6 minutes, and then felt sore all over, and his neck, which had been looking up all the time, became stiff. He nervously asked Anduin, "Is this really effective? I feel like I can't hold on any longer." It's only a few minutes now. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I could hold on longer than you. Don't dawdle, hold on. The longer you hold on, the better the effect. Anduin frowned slightly and said lightly, if you have never tried systematic training, you often need a period of adaptation, just like long-distance running. When you first start training, you always rush too fast and too hard. As a result, you're out of breath before you run halfway. Even if you have enough physical strength to complete the long-distance run, you can't hold on to the end. This is the situation of Charles now. The wizarding world has never had a precedent for systematic training. Basically, they only pay attention to the results, not the process. Ability and results are all based on talent and self-consciousness, and even pure blood families will blame it on bloodline. Anduin has always looked down on this. He plans to personally train Charles to be a wizard far superior to his peers, and use facts to verify that hard work is more important than bloodline. In this case, you can't blame me for being cruel, Anduin thought silently as he looked at Charles, who was struggling to persist. Keep going, hold on. If you can't even complete this little training, how can you avenge your relatives? Anduin said coldly. When Charles heard Anduin's words, he was immediately anxious and kept gritting his teeth to persist. You have to maintain it for at least 10 minutes. Anduin reminded again. Okay. Charles said fiercely. Time passed by minute, and Charles had persisted for more than 10 minutes, but Anduin had not reminded Charles. He was ready to squeeze Charles' potential as much as possible. Not yet. I feel like my magic power has been drained. Because he had exerted too much force at the beginning, Charles now felt a little powerless. There is only one last minute, hold on. In fact, the time has reached 11 minutes, and the magic power Charles has output is basically equal to all the magic power of wizards of his age. After a while, Charles felt a little dizzy and could only ask again, not yet? It seems like a while has passed. Chapter 90 Alchemical Materials. After a while, Charles felt a little dizzy and could only ask again, not done yet? It seems like a while has passed. There are still 30 seconds left. I'm keeping an eye on the time. Don't get discouraged at the critical moment. It was already 13 minutes, and it seemed that Charles had reached his limit. Charles persisted for nearly a minute, but he couldn't hold on any longer. He was already a little shaky. At this time, Anduin was still encouraging him, saying, the last 10 seconds, come on. Charles squeezed out the last bit of magic power in his body and persisted. After silently counting 10 seconds in his mind, he finally couldn't hold on any longer. His whole body softened and he was about to fall to the ground. The basin on his head was about to fall, and Charles was about to become a drowned chicken. At this time, Anduin waved his hand gently, and the basin on his head was firmly controlled. Charles, who was about to fall, was also supported by Anduin. Okay, sit down for a while and drink some water. Anduin helped Charles sit on the chair next to him and handed him a full glass of water. Charles felt limp all over. Since he entered school, he had never experienced the feeling of running out of magic power. Now, he didn't even have the strength to hold his wand. He drank a full glass of water, took a deep breath, and felt alive again, but his body still had no strength. Okay, now is also very important. Feel the state of your body at this time. I'll get you some food to replenish your physical strength after the magic power is exhausted. Your body will replenish your physical strength and magic power for you, and gradually increase your magic power reserves. Anduin reminded. Charles nodded and felt the state of his body. It was like a balloon that had been drained of air. His whole body was limp and very uncomfortable. However, he could now gradually feel that his body was gradually secreting something for him, which should be magic power. A water pipe filled with water, you will feel it as a whole, and you can't tell the difference between water and pipe, but an empty water pipe, gradually filling it with water, you can clearly feel the existence of water flow. Charles is feeling this way now. He can gradually sense the existence of magic, which can continuously train his magic perception, that is, magic sensitivity. If Anduin can help Charles improve his magic sensitivity in a controllable way, then the subject related to magic sensitivity in the spell club will harvest the first precious experimental data. Perhaps Professor Flitwick hinted at him to conduct research and experiments in this area from the beginning. Professor Flitwick must be looking forward to him finding a way to improve magic sensitivity. Perhaps this training of Charles can also help him break through this subject. Anduin brought out a blueberry pie that he had made earlier from Hogwarts' kitchen, handed it to Charles, and asked, "How is it? Do you feel any difference?" Charles took the pie and ate it in big mouthfuls. He was exhausted from what he had just done. While chewing the blueberry pie in his mouth, he said, "It seems to be really useful. I can now feel that magic power is slowly secreted out of my body." Secrete. That word is well used. Remember that feeling. You will feel it often in the future. Anduin said with a teasing smile. Charles swallowed his saliva. The feeling of exhausting all the magic power in his body was too uncomfortable. He couldn't help asking, "Do you also practice like this?" "I started this kind of training when I was 7 years old, and I still do it before going to bed. To be honest, the effect will be better at the beginning. After getting used to it, I can basically know where my limit is." Anduin said. "What, it started when you were 7 years old? My God, how did you persist in such a painful experience?" Charles looked at Anduin in amazement. Anduin said nonchalantly, "If you want to get something, you have to pay for it, right?" Then Anduin let Charles rest in the cabin for a while, and had dinner with Hagrid. Hagrid also liked Charles, a Gryffindor student, very much, and Charles praised Anduin's cooking skills. After dinner, Anduin accompanied Charles back to the castle. Anduin still had to go to Professor Bones to learn spells. "Today I will introduce you to some alchemical materials, come and have a look." Professor Bones spread all kinds of materials on the large table in the middle of the office, roughly wood, metal and leather. Anduin looked at the dazzling array of materials on the table, touched them one by one, and felt the texture of different materials. Suddenly, he found that a material looked very familiar no matter how he looked or touched it, and it was very similar to the amulet that Lily gave him. Bones saw Anduin holding a copper material and repeatedly observing it, and smiled and said, "Since you are so curious about this, let's start with the metal material. The material in your hand is called Parath brass, which was invented by the legendary alchemist Parath. It is a very popular alchemical metal. Generally, beginners use this material to practice. It has stable properties, good energy storage effect, and not too expensive." Bones introduced it to Anduin. It turned out that this is a material for novices to practice. When Lily gave him the amulet, she said that she made it casually, and she really didn't lie to him. Invention. Then Anduin realized something. Yes, there are only so many known metals in the world today, whether it is the wizard world or the muggle world, and there are no natural magic metals. These metal magic materials are actually alloys. Wizards often use metal as raw material, fuse other metals, input magic power or add some magical creatures in the manufacturing process to form alloys with magical properties. And according to the different alloy formulas, there will be different properties, so many ordinary metals are not valuable in themselves, but the alloy formula is very precious. Parath brass is an alchemical material with a public formula, so it is not valuable. Bones explained to Anduin. That's right, if there is any special magic metal in this world, it will definitely be discovered by the Muggle world first. Bones then picked up a silver candlestick and showed it to Anduin. This is Mithril, also known as Fairy Mithril. The alloy formula is firmly controlled by the fairies. Many silverware produced by the fairies are made of Fairy Mithril. It has very good magic conductivity and is extremely stable. However, its disadvantage is that it is soft in texture. Alchemy masters usually choose to make it into a kind of magic jewelry, or mix some Mithril with other alchemical metals to increase the magic conductivity. Chapter 91 Flame Alloy. Since the formula of Mithril is completely controlled by the goblins, it is now very valuable in the market, and its price is equal to that of a gold galleon. However, it is basically out of stock and can only be purchased at high prices on some black markets. Many alchemists will buy some goblin silverware and melt it into liquid metal to make alchemical items. The only goblin silverware I have is this candlestick. It is also said that there is a kind of refined mithril, which is more effective than ordinary mithril, but it is very rare. It is said that Rowena Ravenclaw, the founder of Hogwarts, used a whole piece of refined mithril to make a crown, which is the legendary Ravenclaw crown. Anduin took the silverware from Bones' hand, examined it carefully, and found that this material was much more dazzling than ordinary silver. When held up to the light, a patch of twinkling star-like light appeared on it, which was very beautiful. Bones then explained a kind of metal material to Anduin. This is the Goblin Alim steel, also called Alim steel, Goblin iron, Goblin steel, etc. It is also a craft alloy unique to the goblins. It has the hardest texture and stability in the current wizarding world, and its magical performance is average. It is a relatively rare magic alloy, and is the top material for making space alchemical items. If you cast the Traceless extension spell on it, as long as you charge it regularly, the theoretical use time is unlimited, and the space that can be extended is also very large. Anduin saw a brooch in Professor Bones' hand, and then Professor Bones input some magic power into the brooch, and then a piece of clothing appeared in Professor Bones' hand, and then he put the clothing back into the brooch. In addition to making space-type alchemical props, this material is also often used to make items such as boxes or doors due to its solid texture. For example, the door of the Gringotts Vault is said to be mixed with a lot of alim steel. Another legendary treasure of Hogwarts, the Gryffindor sword, is also said to be made of alim steel and disamithril. Professor Bones explained to Anduin in detail. Anduin nodded and said, "It seems that the goblins are very good at metal craftsmanship. They actually have so many high-quality alchemical formulas." Professor Bones also said with great approval, "Yes, the goblins have made great achievements in magic metals. Because of these achievements, the goblins once gave them very strong racial self-confidence, which also led to the outbreak of that famous Goblin Rebellion in history." Professor Bones paused and continued, it is said that there were many alchemists behind the war between goblins and wizards. Those alchemists coveted the magic metal formula in the hands of the goblins. Some people also said that the war was jointly instigated by some alchemists. Didn't the wizards win the final war, and the formula was not snatched away? Anduin asked, recalling the contents of the history of magic. That was just a verbal victory. In fact, the wizards were not sure of winning completely. The goblins resisted very tenaciously. If they wanted to win absolutely, the wizards would also suffer serious casualties, and, Professor Bones paused and said, it is said that there was an alchemist in the wizarding world at the time who prevented the war from continuing to deteriorate. Oh? Who is it? Anduin asked curiously. Nick Flamel. The alchemist Nick Flamel who created the Philosopher's Stone. Anduin was shocked. Yes, and the reason is related to the magic metal I will introduce to you next. Professor Bones said to Anduin. However, this time, Professor Bones did not show Anduin the real thing, but took out a piece of parchment. After unfolding the parchment and handing it to Anduin, he continued. I don't have the real thing of this material, and the real thing is also very difficult to find nowadays. The photo on the parchment is the record of the material I can find. Anduin looked at the magic picture on the parchment. On it, a hand was holding a piece of ordinary-looking metal block. It looked a bit like the titanium metal in Anduin's memory, a little lighter than silver. Then he looked up at Professor Bones in confusion. This is the invention that indirectly prevented the expansion of the war, Flamel alloy. Professor Bones said. Flamel alloy. Hearing this name with a personal color, Anduin also realized something. Yes, this is a brand new magic metal formula invented by Nick Flamel. It has a strength close to that of alim steel, and has magic and stability close to that of isomithril. It is an excellent alchemical material. Professor Bones explained to Anduin. So that's how it is. With this metal formula belonging to wizards, there is no need for the formula of the goblins. Did Nick Flamel share this formula with the wizards? Anduin asked. This is the most controversial part of the story. After the Goblin Rebellion was completely over, many alchemy masters wanted to find Nick Flamel and ask him to supply this magic metal to the wizarding world, but Nick Flamel disappeared. Professor Bones said with a smile. Disappeared? Yes, Nick Flamel almost completely disappeared from everyone's sight after that. Occasionally, some Flamel alloy would flow out, which proved that Nick Flamel was not dead, but obviously he did not want too much of this material to flow to the wizarding world. Some people speculated that it was because the production process of this alloy was very difficult, and some people speculated that this alloy was expensive and the raw materials were very difficult to obtain. Some people also believed that this material needed to be made with the Philosopher's Stone, and after production, it would affect the Philosopher's Stone's production of the elixir of life. In short, this material is basically the rarest on the market now. Then Professor Bones smiled again and said, but I may be able to own one soon. Dumbledore promised to give me a piece of Flamel. This is also one of the rewards for my teaching here. Principal Dumbledore is so generous that he would give away such a precious material just like that. Anduin said a little unbelievingly. Yes, maybe it's because Dumbledore knows Nick Flamel. Professor Bones smiled and glanced at Anduin who was shocked, then nodded and continued, yes, Nick Flamel is still alive, and he is also a good friend of Dumbledore. It is said that Dumbledore is also one of the few people who know the whereabouts of Nick Flamel. Anduin took a breath of cold air. He really didn't expect this. Anduin could understand that Nick Flamel was still alive. After all, owning the Philosopher's Stone was equivalent to owning the Elixir of Life, but Principal Dumbledore was actually Nick Flamel's friend. Doesn't that mean he has an endless source of Flamel? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novel, as there you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 92 Engraving. This made Anduin a little confused. Why didn't he get more Flamel alloy from Nick Flamel to arm the Order of the Phoenix? Is it really because there is something difficult in making this alloy? Anduin had no idea, but this kind of advanced material was not something he could imagine at the moment. Then Professor Bones continued to introduce some other magic metals to Anduin. For example, the Agrabah alloy, which is slightly less durable than Alim steel, was invented by the human wizard Cornelius Agrabah, and many alchemists have the formula, so it is not very rare. There is also the infamous Hippor alloy, an alloy suitable for carrying curses and black magic, invented by the despicable Hippor. This alloy has a good transformation property and can be converted and disguised as other magic metals. It is a material that is very suitable for using to deceive people. Obviously, Professor Bones' alchemy level is not as shallow as he said. He can name most of the materials in the wizarding world and has a very rich knowledge accumulation. Moreover, he already had most of the alchemical materials on hand, either raw materials or various physical objects that had been made into alchemical items. Observing and touching these materials with his own eyes allowed him to quickly have a basic impression of these materials. After introducing various magic metals, Professor Bones explained to Anduin the role of a lot of wood in alchemy, and the application of many magical creatures in alchemy. In fact, the most common alchemical props on the market now are of this type. The skins, hairs, bones, blood, teeth, etc. of many magical creatures are widely used in alchemy. When introducing magical biological materials, Anduin suddenly realized a problem, that is, he seemed to have been sitting in a treasure house without knowing it. He had seen many materials such as skins, hairs, bones, etc. introduced by Professor Bones in Hagrid's hut. For example, when introducing unicorn hair, Anduin found that this was not the rope that Hagrid used to hang bacon, and it was the kind that was braided together with more than a dozen strands. He was curious before, how could the rope for tying bacon not change color at all and always maintain a bright luster? The cushion Hagrid gave him, which was very comfortable to sit on, turned out to be the fur of a manticore. Anduin also found a larger piece of that fur in Hagrid's hut, which Hagrid used to pad the box. The needle Hagrid used to make leather goods turned out to be a horn of a horned beast, and the footpad placed at the door turned out to be a dragon's skin, which he had never noticed. My goodness, it turns out that Hagrid is an invisible rich man. Anduin felt that he could no longer look at Hagrid with the eyes of a normal person. In the next few days, Anduin studied with Professor Bones and identified many alchemical materials. On this day, Professor Bones finally began to explain to him how to make alchemical items. Here, these are the important tools for alchemical enchantment. Professor Bones spread out a roll-up toolkit and said to Anduin. In the toolkit, there were 14 carving knives, 7 inches a group, a magnifying glass, and tools such as a scale, a ruler, a compass, and pliers were placed next to it. The other requires more advanced skills, using a dark carving knife to directly inject magic power into the alchemical material, and then maintain a stable magic output, and directly enchant while carving the runes. This kind of enchantment process requires extremely strong magic control, and the alchemical effect of the finished product is also better. Professor Bones introduced the functions of various carving knives and explained the different enchantment processes. Anduin nodded and checked the difference between the two sets of carving knives. One set of carving knives was for open carving, with a sharp blade at the tip, while the one for hidden carving had no blade at the front. Instead, it was like a fountain pen, with a thin tube, which was used to transmit magic power. Okay, give it a try. You have good control over magic power, so you can try hidden carving directly. If it doesn't work, practice open carving. Professor Bones handed Anduin a piece of wood as a carrier for engraving. Anduin took the wood, then took a medium-sized hidden carving knife, tried to input magic power, and soon the front of the carving knife lit up slightly. Then he controlled the magic power output and tried to carve the runes of the floating spell on the wood. After the actual operation, Anduin found that engraving was indeed difficult. On the one hand, he had to control the uniform output of magic power, and on the other hand, he had to pay attention to the accuracy of the carving. Fortunately, the runes of the floating spell that he was very familiar with were engraved, so the probability of error was not high. After engraving more than half of the rune, Anduin lost control and output too much magic power, and the wood chip cracked. Professor Bones beside him nodded slightly and said, "It's already very good. It seems that you have good control over your magic power. What's rare is that your hands are also very stable. This is easy to happen when wooden materials are squeezed by excessive magic power. If it is on a metal material, the tolerance will be much higher. It seems that you're very suitable for the craft of engraving. Try it again." Anduin nodded and took another piece of wood to try to engrave it. However, he made another mistake after engraving half of it and wasted the material. Professor Bones was very patient and kept encouraging Anduin to try. Finally, after making 4 mistakes, he completed the engraving of the rune. After a little activation with magic power, the engraved small wood chip floated calmly in the air. "Well done, you succeeded once and 5 times, and it was on a very difficult wooden material. Your success rate is close to that of a professional alchemist." Professor Bones was even more excited than Anduin when he saw Anduin succeed, and he said happily, "Thank you, Professor Bones." Anduin was also very happy. After crossing this hurdle, his alchemy experiment could gradually begin. "Well, you must practice diligently when you go back. I will lend you this engraving knife first. When you gradually become familiar with the feeling of engraving, we will start testing your echolocation spell." Professor Bones was very satisfied to see that Anduin had such a good talent, and encouraged him. Chapter 93 Experiment. "Don't worry, Professor." Anduin smiled happily. In the following time, Anduin borrowed a lot of spell-related books from the library. As long as he returned to the cabin, he began to study spell books and practice engraving. Charles also began to accept Anduin's special training. He would meet Anduin every morning and then do morning exercises together. At first, Charles was exhausted because Anduin's own training intensity was very high. The route he planned was at least 5 kilometers. After adapting for a week, Charles could barely keep up with the progress. In the afternoon, Charles returned to the Forbidden Forest cabin to practice spells and delay training. Anduin set up several wooden human targets outside the cabin and let Charles practice disarming spell, coma spell and so on, and then do delay training. Although it was only a few hours a day, Charles was exhausted as if he was hollowed out, but the feeling of becoming stronger made Charles very obsessed. On this day, Anduin, who was about to go to the library to return a book, met Vivian in the clock square, but at this time she was sitting on the bench next to her with an ugly expression. "What's wrong, Vivian? Didn't you say you were going to participate in the Quidditch tryouts today?" Anduin remembered that Vivian excitedly told Anduin yesterday that she was going to sign up for the tryouts to become a Quidditch player. In Anduin's opinion, Vivian's flying skills were good. Even if she was not directly selected as a starting player, at least she would have a substitute spot, so Anduin was quite supportive of her. Seeing that it was Anduin, Vivian complained to him angrily, "What a selection. Now those pure blood guys are not only jumping around in the common room, but now they also want to control our college's Quidditch team. Any Slytherin student who doesn't clearly side with them is not allowed to participate in the Quidditch selection. Even the original veteran players, as long as they are not on their side, are suppressed." Anduin frowned slightly and said, "Then Vanessa and Jean Slughorn don't care, just let them do this. You know that our dean is a good guy. What can he say to those tough guys? As long as there is no armed fight, he dare not intervene, and he is too lazy to intervene. And Senior Vanessa is about to graduate, and she is very busy every day. Besides, those guys don't take her seriously at all. When the senior is present, they are more restrained, but as long as she is not there, they will make a big fuss," Vivian said indignantly. Anduin had not been back to the Slytherin common room for a while because of his own safety. He did not expect that it would be so tense now. Vivian was a person who could not hold back. She continued angrily, "Oh my God, do you know what they're saying now? They dare to declare their support for the Dark Lord in public. Senior Veron Higgs from the 4th grade was expelled from the Quidditch team because he argued with them for a few words. He was the hero seeker who helped us defeat the Gryffindor team last year." When Anduin heard Vivian mention it, he also recalled Veron Higgs. In his impression, he was a polite senior with excellent flying skills. "So your Quidditch selection is ruined?" Anduin asked. "What else? Now the guy Rowley actually is leading his reorganized Quidditch team to give a speech. With a prefect like him, I don't think Slyring will win a Quidditch game this year. Vivian said dejectedly. Rolly Axley. Anduin heard this name again. This guy is a diehard who advocates pure blood supremacy. He had a big fight with Senior Vanessa in the common room at the beginning of last year. Now he is leading those pure blood students. Seeing Vivian's dejected look, he couldn't help but comfort her. Okay, Vivian, if you didn't get selected, then you didn't get selected. If you can't do it this year, you can choose next year. I believe in your ability. You have to have confidence in yourself. It's not as easy as you say. With them around, let alone next year, I may not be able to play on the Quidditch field once in the 7 years of school. Vivian listened to Anduin's meaningless comfort and said unhappily. That's not necessarily true. You have confidence in yourself, and I have confidence in myself too. They won't be proud for long. Anduin said meaningfully. What do you mean? Vivian didn't understand Anduin's words, but seemed to realize that something was wrong. It's okay. I will support you, and I hope you will support me too. Anduin finally comforted Vivian and turned away. Support me. Support you. Vivian tilted her head and repeated in confusion. Anduin ignored these guys who were jumping up and down. He just wanted to enhance his own strength as much as possible. The learning progress of the spell was very fast. Professor Bones explained it in a simple and easy to understand way, and Anduin understood it at once. His echolocation spell has overcome many difficulties recently. After the two of them constantly adjusted the combination structure of the spell, it can emit enough frequency after activating the spell, which means that the ultrasonic wave has been achieved. Now the problem of receiving needs to be solved. For this, Professor Bones and Anduin have also combined several receiving runes. As long as the test is successful, they can try to engrave them into the alchemical props. The fourth group of runes is much better than the previous ones. The sound waves refracted back can be transformed into images and can be formed, but the accuracy is a bit unsatisfactory and not very stable. You record it first. After testing the last two groups, if the effect is average, I suggest using the fourth group as a prototype for fine-tuning. Professor Bones said, holding a crystal ball used to test the spell and observing the image inside. Anduin, who was casting the ultrasonic spell, quickly recorded the test data on parchment after hearing Professor Bones' description. The two had been conducting experiments for a while. Anduin was responsible for casting the spell to send out the ultrasonic sound, while Professor Bones used a crystal ball with different spells to receive it. Each spell was tested about 10 times. After testing 4 groups, only the fourth group could form an image, and the others could not. Okay, let's test the fifth group of runes next. Professor Bones put down the crystal ball in his hand and took out another one. Yes, Professor. Anduin nodded and began to cast the ultrasonic sound again. After years of self-practice, Anduin has a very strong control over magic power. When using the new spells he developed, he can directly cast silently, which greatly improves efficiency and does not need to translate the spells into spells. Chapter 94. Rune Engraving. After testing it over and over again, Professor Bones put down the crystal ball, picked up a new one, and said, the fifth set of runes didn't work out well either. Let's test the sixth set last. Anduin nodded and agreed, and continued to cast the spell. What is this? Professor Bones exclaimed as he looked at the crystal ball containing the sixth set of runes. What's wrong? Anduin asked with his head tilted. Come and see for yourself. Professor Bones handed the crystal ball to Anduin, and urged him to cast the spell again. After Anduin took the crystal ball, he cast the ultrasonic wave again. Then when Anduin looked through the crystal ball, he could clearly see the ripples inside forming an image. Anduin kept changing the angle, and he could observe the holographic scene of the entire office in the crystal ball, including the area behind that desk that was invisible to the naked eye, and the image was clear and stable. What is this? Did we succeed? Anduin said excitedly as he looked at the scene in the crystal ball. It seems so. I didn't expect that the world composed entirely of sound waves would be so wonderful. Professor Bones also said excitedly. It seems that the sixth set of runes is the closest to the finished product. We will definitely be able to complete the spell by optimizing it with this set of runes as the core. Anduin was delighted. He had never expected that things would go so smoothly. Great, let's get started. I can't wait. I know the ring structure will work. Professor Bones excitedly turned on the rune table and took Anduin to start the optimization work. The two of them made several fine adjustments to the structure and spacing of the rooms on the room table, and tested them several times. Finally, they determined the most satisfactory room structure. Professor Bones also breathed a sigh of relief and said, it's finally done. The next step is to engrave it on the alchemical material. Anduin, are you ready to complete your first alchemical item? Anduin looked at the final rune, feeling full of pride, and excitedly thanked the professor. Thank you for everything, Professor Bones. Without you, I can't complete this spell by myself. Don't be modest. Without your wonderful ideas, I wouldn't have seen such a special rune. Professor Bones laughed. As a pure scholar, he was very satisfied to see the creation of a new spell. Regarding the alchemical item, my idea is to make a pair of glasses, composed of polished crystal lenses and rather brass. What do you think? Anduin proposed his idea to Professor Bones. I think it's okay. My initial idea was also a mirror or glasses. The glasses are preferably round, so that the ring structure can just surround a brass frame and then present an image in the crystal lens. Professor Bones suggested. Well, then make a pair of monocles, so that one glass can observe the echo imaging, and the other glass can see things normally. Anduin also added. Not a bad idea, the materials are easy to get. I will prepare the materials, you go back and engrave this rune a few more times, and I will notify you when the materials are ready in a few days. It's really exciting, I can't wait to see the finished product now. Professor Bones said excitedly. Anduin saw that Professor Bones had taught him wholeheartedly for so long and now helped to produce materials. He was sincerely grateful. Thank you, Professor, you helped me so much, I really don't know how to thank you. Professor Bones waved his hand and smiled. What's the big deal? This is the result we have completed together. I also cherish it very much. How about this? I will prepare 2 sets of materials at the time, and one of the positioning glasses will be considered as a gift from you. Anduin saw that Professor Bones was so generous, and he also smiled and nodded. In the next few days, Anduin practiced engraving rooms whenever he had time. The echolocation spell was relatively simpler because it was broken down into 2 groups of runes, but it was not a familiar rune combination after all. At the beginning, Anduin still wasted a lot of time and failed more often. After several days of practice, Anduin's engraving success rate gradually increased. Because of long-term practice, the magic input during engraving has also formed muscle memory. He can focus more on the accuracy of engraving, which greatly increases his progress. In a new Dark Magic Defensor class that day, Professor Bones greeted him after the class and said that the materials were ready and they could start formally in the evening. Anduin suppressed his excitement and began to practice the engraving of the turnaround positioning spell repeatedly after returning to the cabin. He planned to adjust his state before engraving in the evening. Even Charles, who came to train, was sent to the side by Anduin to practice by himself. After dinner in the evening, Anduin came to the door of Professor Bones' office in high spirits. Are you ready? Then let's get started. Professor Bones was very efficient and smiled at Anduin, who was eager to try. Then Professor Bones took out the prepared materials, which were 2 round monocles that had been processed. They had dark copper frames and the mirrors were polished from transparent crystal. There was no curvature and the lenses were completely flat. They were also equipped with a thin dark copper chain, which looked very delicate. Well, I have been practicing microcarving recently. After all, the frames are thin. I hope I can succeed in one go. Anduin replied with a smile. Don't bother with that. Have you forgotten that we are wizards? You don't need to accommodate these dead things. You have to let these dead things accommodate you. Professor Bones said with a smile. Then Professor Bones placed a lens on a piece of velvet on the table, then took out his wand and cast an amplification spell on the lens. The lens deformed and enlarged under the effect of the spell, and directly became the size of a bone dish. Anduin suddenly realized that he had fallen into a blind spot and forgot that he could cast a spell on the materials. This spell can last for more than half an hour. Let's measure the size first, then you practice it on a piece of wood of the same size, and then I'll cast the spell again, and then you can officially start. Professor Bones arranged in an orderly manner. Anduin nodded. Professor Bones was very thoughtful. Then Anduin began to practice on a wooden disc of the same size. Unsurprisingly, he failed the first time because the surface of the engraving became an arc, and Anduin failed to grasp the spacing of the engraving. The second engraving was successful, and the time was controlled within half an hour. After all, He practiced many times, and the room structure was basically memorized in his mind, so there were almost no mistakes, and he also adapted to engraving on the curved surface. I apologized to everyone first. The editor said that I updated too quickly, and the recommendations for me were not finished, but they were about to be put on the shelves, so I adjusted the update status. There may be only 2 updates in the next 2 or 3 days. After the recommendations are finished, I will resume 3 updates. Chapter 95 completed. Very good, then let's officially start. Professor Bones smiled with satisfaction when he saw Anduin's engraving was going so smoothly. Yeah. Anduin nodded. Professor Bones cast the magnification spell on a monocle again. Anduin carefully raised the dark carving knife and carved on the magnified frame of the glasses. His concentration made him empty everything and focus all his mind on engraving. Professor Bones beside him was also very quiet and did not disturb him. In Anduin's world, he went through a long half hour. After many practices and attempts, his emotions would no longer fluctuate too much. However, due to the time limit, he always had the thought of will there not be enough time? In his mind. However, even so, he did not affect the stability of his hands. It's done. Anduin put down the glasses frame and carving knife in his hand and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Although it was the first time to operate on a real alchemical prop, he still did not make any mistakes. Okay, try it yourself. Professor Bones was also very happy to see this, and urged Anduin to try it quickly. Anduin cast spell stop to restore the monocle to its original size, then gently pinched it, put it in front of his right eye, slightly opened his eye sockets, and clamped the lens. Then he raised his wand and cast an echo spell. At this time, Anduin's right eye could clearly see a wave line, which spread out in all directions, and then presented him with the outlines of all objects in the office. After Anduin closed his left eye, this scene became clearer, and the whole world in his eyes was almost composed of dark blue and grey-white lines. How is it? Professor Bones couldn't help asking. Very amazing, you should try it yourself. Anduin took off his glasses and handed them to Professor Bones. Professor Bones also tried it himself, and couldn't help showing an intoxicated expression on his face. He said excitedly, "What a unique and wonderful perspective. Are these ripples that keep flowing on the walls and objects the sound waves you mentioned? Yes, even I didn't expect the finished product to be so surprising." Anduin also suppressed the joy in his heart. Don't be lazy, there is still one to be engraved. Take a break and drink some water, and then we will continue. Professor Bones laughed. Yeah. Anduin also nodded in response. After a break, Anduin quickly got into this state. This time the engraving was easier than the first time. He already had successful experience, and his worries were basically dissipated. He completed this operation smoothly. After completing the engraving of the 2 monocles, Professor Bones and Anduin couldn't help wearing the glasses and playing together. Soon, the 2 are no longer satisfied with just trying it in the office, and ran to the corridor outside the room to test it, like 2 children who got a new toy. Anduin's wand kept casting the echo charm, and then the 2 of them observed everything around them through their glasses, the ground, the corridor, the wall, and then continued to extend to the distance. They also saw 2 lovers secretly hiding in a corner, an owl flying by, and Filch patrolling 2 floors away. The echo charm can cover a wide range. Now basically with the 2 of them as the center, all corners within a radius of more than 100 meters where the sound waves can reach can be seen. The more you experience it, the more amazing it is. This feeling is really addictive. Anduin, thank you for letting me enjoy such a novel experience at this age. Professor Bones said with a smile. You are too kind, Professor. If it weren't for your help, I wouldn't be able to complete this set of spells by myself. Anduin answered realistically. Don't be too modest. Just with this set of spells, you will become famous in the wizard academic world. Hurry up and write a paper for it. I will help you submit it to various academic journals. Professor Bones reminded. Okay, but please allow me to put your name on the developer list, after all, we worked on it together. Anduin looked at Professor Bones and smiled. Okay, but I can only be the second signer. You are the initiator of this research. Professor Bones smiled and did not reject Anduin's kindness, but just added. The 2 smiled at each other and returned to the room to celebrate the birth of the new spell. In addition to celebrating, Professor Bones also shared a lot of alchemy information in the Wizarding World with Anduin. Currently, Wizarding World has a dedicated alchemy research center headquartered in Cairo, Egypt. The British magic world does not have much influence in the international alchemy academic community. The only famous alchemist in the UK is Dumbledore. He once won the International Alchemy Conference Pioneering Contribution Gold Award at the Cairo International Alchemy Conference. It's a pity that Dumbledore himself did not spend more time and energy on alchemy. Professor Bones was very optimistic about Anduin and thought he had the potential to become a great alchemist. He constantly encouraged Anduin to study more in this field, and he might shine at the International Alchemy Conference in the future. After hearing Professor Bones' introduction, Anduin had a deep understanding of the wizarding world. After learning that Britain was actually half an alchemy desert, he began to yearn for the wizarding world in other countries. Since that night, there were two more people wearing monocles in Hogwarts. One was Edgar Bones, the professor of defense against the dark arts, and the other was Anduin, which made everyone very curious. Is this a new look in the wizarding world? Lend it to me, Anduin, is this a new trend? Why do you wear this monocle all day long? With Vivian's personality, she quickly got over the disappointment of being a Quidditch player last time. Seeing Anduin and Professor Bones wearing small glasses all day long aroused her curiosity. It's nothing. This is just your gift for Professor Bones. How about I give you one this Christmas? Anduin was speechless about Vivian, who kept pestering him. He had to put away his glasses during class, otherwise he would always be noticed by others. I don't want to. I just want to try it out. Vivian imagined herself wearing a monocle every day and shook her head. Anduin had no choice but to lend his glasses to Vivian to try. If the echo spell was not activated, it would be just an ordinary pair of plain glasses. What? There is no degree at all. Do you wear this thing every day just to look cool? Vivian tried wearing the monocle, then found a mirror to pose, and found that there was nothing special about it, so her interest was greatly reduced. Chapter 96. Infrasonic Curse. After taking back his glasses, Anduin had no time to waste time with Vivian. He had more important things to do. He said goodbye to Vivian and quickly returned to the Forbidden Forest hut. Today he was going to complete the research and experiment of another spell, which was the infrasound spell that was opposite to the echo spell. The echo spell used high-frequency ultrasonic waves that reverberate back to the original path after contacting an object, and detected the objects passing along the way. Its main application was reconnaissance and exploration. The infrasound wave, which was opposite to its principle, was an ultra-low frequency sound wave. Because it was similar to the vibration frequency of the organs of the organism, it was easy to form resonance and could directly affect the nervous system of the organism. The high-intensity infrasound wave had an exaggerated lethality. In his previous research, Anduin had already overcome the difficulty of how to adjust the frequency of the sound wave. Since increasing the frequency was possible, reducing the frequency was naturally no problem. In recent days, Anduin has been developing and experimenting with related spells. Next is the 33rd test of the infrasonic spell. The spell combination is at triangle. The test time is 16:37 on October 14th. After Anduin wrote this in his notebook, he went outside with a cage containing mice. Since it was a test of a killing spell, Anduin prepared a lot of mice as test subjects. Pulling out the wand, Anduin recalled the structure of the spell to be tested, controlled the magic power to form the spell at the front of the wand, and then put the wand in front of the mouse cage and gently tapped it to activate the spell. But, a silent wave burst out from the tip of the wand. Although no sound was heard, Anduin could clearly feel its impact. Caught off guard, he was numb all over, and only heard tinnitus in his ears, and then an extremely indescribable feeling of nausea came up. I can't stand it anymore. Anduin couldn't stand it anymore. He staggered and held on to the wooden fence beside him. He bent down and vomited violently, and his tears and snot flowed. He felt very uncomfortable all over. After bending down and vomiting for at least 5 or 6 minutes, Anduin gradually recovered, but his head was still dizzy. He had to stand there and close his eyes to rest for a long time before he finally woke up. He shook his head vigorously and felt that the dizziness gradually disappeared. Then Anduin hurriedly ran to the basin in the house to wash his face, and then walked to the mirror and observed himself carefully. Fortunately, my eyes are slightly red, my vision is not affected, my hearing, well, has gradually recovered, my sense of taste is normal, and my perception and touch are tending to be normal. Good guy almost sent me away. Anduin checked his condition in the mirror and said with lingering fear. The good news is that the magic combination of this spell has been found, and it is very effective and has a strong interference ability. The bad news is that this spell seems to be indiscriminate between enemies and friends, and the caster is closest to the enemy, so in killing the enemy, he will hurt himself first. It's really a headache. Anduin summarized the spell experiment and said to himself, "By the way, where is the mouse?" Anduin suddenly realized that he still had an experimental subject to observe, and hurriedly ran out of the house. When he walked to the cage, Anduin lowered his head, but only saw the little mouse as the test subject, which was now bleeding from all 7 orifices and completely lost its life. The effect of this spell is a bit outrageous. Looking at the mouse that was shocked to death by this spell, he couldn't help but feel a little scared. If the effect of this spell was stronger, he might also be finished. Even if he was not killed directly, he might cause irreversible damage. It's still too reckless. No wonder Bones said that testing spells is a dangerous job. Anduin frowned and muttered. What should he do next? The structure of the spell has been basically determined, but he can't test it anymore. This spell is simply a self-destructing spell, which hurts the enemy and hurts himself. If he stops researching, Anduin will be a little unwilling. It seems that he has to find another way. If I use blocking ears to block my hearing, will I not be affected by infrasound? No, infrasound is not a simple sound, but a sound wave that directly penetrates into the body and destroys it. Anduin frowned and thought about all the possibilities. I don't know if using silent or whispering spell will have any effect. Do I need to test it again? I don't know if these spells have the function of eliminating sound waves. It's really a headache. I have to come up with a counter spell before developing a spell. Anduin was struggling whether to test it again. Anduin hesitated for a long time, but the new spell was right in front of him. It was too uncomfortable to just look at it but not use it. In the end, he decided to try it again. Just in case, the magic output during the test will be reduced by 70%. After thinking it through, Anduin swallowed his saliva, then pointed his wand at himself, and cast Block Your Ears and Listen, Silence, Whispering Spell, and all the spells he knew that could silence or reduce the volume. He didn't plan to try each spell one by one. If it worked, he could then identify which spell was effective. If it didn't work, he could eliminate all the spells. Anduin couldn't hear any sound for a while, then he took a deep breath, adjusted the magic output, and firmly activated the spell. Ugh! The figure next to the hut vomited again while holding the railing. The reaction is not as strong as last time, but it is very likely because of the adjustment of the magic power. In other words, these spells are basically useless. This time Anduin recovered much faster. After a slight adjustment, he immediately summarized the previous experiment. It seems that I have to develop another spell that completely isolates sound waves. It's really troublesome. Anduin thought a little dejectedly. This experiment gave Anduin hope, but also gave him a big problem, which made him clueless for a while. Forget it, I'll ask Professor Bones if he has any good ideas tonight. Anduin thought depressedly. At this time, Charles had finished the training for the day and was walking over from a distance, sweating all over. Previously, because Anduin had to do spell experiments recently, he sent Charles to a place a little far away from the hub to train on his own in the past few days. Now, Charles, who trains and eats with Anduin every day, has become much stronger and more energetic. What's the smell, Anduin? What on earth did you do here just now? Why is it sour and smelly, and there is a dead rat? Charles asked in confusion. Nothing, I just did a small experiment, something went wrong, and I was just about to clean it up. After Anduin said that, he waved his wand to expel all the air around him, and then cleaned up the scene with a cleaning spell. Chapter 97 Wind and Wave Repelling Spell. Charles watched Anduin clean up the scene, and without thinking much, he ran to the house and poured a large glass of water and drank it. Then he asked curiously, "How is your experiment going? I heard you say last time that it was an experiment on sound wave magic. It's a little progress, but now there are new problems. I still need to find a way to isolate the sound waves. Anyway, it's very troublesome." Anduin answered while thinking about the solution. Isolate the sound. Can't you use the ear blocking spell or silent? Charles asked. It shouldn't be possible. Sound waves are different from sound. It's not that you can't hear it. Anduin answered helplessly. Is it so complicated? Sound waves. I haven't heard of it, but I have heard of water waves. It would be great if sound waves could be calmed by the wind and wave repelling spell like water waves. Charles said casually while drinking water. Wait, Charles, what did you just say? Anduin suddenly raised his head and stared at Charles. What did I say? Water waves. Charles said. Not this one. You just said there is a spell that can calm the waves. Anduin confirmed. Are you talking about the wind and wave repelling spell? Charles said uncertainly. Yes, that's it. Is there really such a spell that can calm the waves? Anduin asked. I heard it from a senior sister when she was bragging. It was Glenda Chittick from our college. She said that when she was playing in the Aegean Sea, she encountered wind and waves, and then a wizard who was traveling with her used this spell to calm the waves. She also learned this spell from that wizard. Charles saw Anduin staring at him with wide eyes, so he answered everything. Then can I ask that senior sister to teach me? This is very important for my experiment. Anduin asked excitedly when he heard that it was a spell from the school's student union. She is now a 7th grade student. It seems that she went to intern because she applied for a job in the Wizard Radio Network. Charles recalled and answered. What? Will she go back to school? I remember that there is a final magic exam in the 7th grade. Anduin asked. It seems that it is not necessary to take the exam. I will go back and ask other people in the Mahjong Club for you. There is another senior who is quite familiar with her. Charles replied. Mahjong Club, what is that? Is there such a club? Anduin seemed to have heard something incredible. Charles smiled with his hands on his waist. Of course not, it is a club that Vivian and I founded together. You are usually mysterious all day long and never walk around the castle, so naturally you don't know. You know, our club now has more than a dozen members. What do you usually do in this club? Just play mahjong. Anduin felt that the appearance of this club was inexplicable and asked curiously. Yes, you lent us a set of mahjong before, and then after Christmas, you gave me and Vivian a set each. We took these sets of mahjong and played in our respective colleges. Later, more people liked it, so we naturally formed a club. You know, there are Wizard Chess Club, God's Turn Club, Thunderbolt Explosion Card Club, etc. in Hogwarts. Now the number of people in our Mahjong Club is not less than that of other game clubs. It is also a big club in the school. Charles said with a smile. You know, he is one of the founders of this club. There is also such a thing. It seems that he has been obsessed with research and has never paid attention to the things in Hogwarts Castle. Even Anduin rarely looks at the school bulletin board. You know, it was he who taught these two people to play Mahjong, but he has never touched the cards again. Charles is very proud of the Mahjong Club he founded, and he wants to pull Anduin to join the club, but Anduin has no interest in entertainment now, so he still refuses him and only asks Charles to help find out about the situation of senior sister Glenda Chittick. And so, that senior sister will come back to the academy next week. 2 days later, Anduin looked at Charles who came to train and asked about the things he had told him before. Yes, it seems that the senior sister's internship results are very good. It is said that she may become a broadcaster of the Wizard Radio Network in the future. Charles replied, recalling the news he had asked the seniors. Since the failed experiment 2 days ago, Anduin dared not cast the subsonic spell casually. He just used the room disk to optimize the structure of the spell several times, but he had no idea how effective it was. In his imagination, water waves and sound waves are both waves. The wind and wave repelling spell can dispel water waves, and theoretically it will also have an effect on sound waves. Even if it is not completely useful, it should be able to give him some inspiration, so he seemed so anxious. Okay, then I'll leave it to you, Charles. Anduin knew that things could not be rushed. Don't worry, I will go to find her as soon as the senior sister returns to school. Charles assured Anduin. Well, thank you, Charles. Anduin thanked him and said, I see that you have been able to adapt to this intensity of training recently, so we can officially start special training. What, weren't those previous trainings special training? Charles was startled and stared at Anduin seriously and asked. That's just adaptive training, just like warming up before exercise. I'm afraid you can't stand it if you start high-intensity training at the beginning. Anduin explained lightly. Hiss. Charles took a breath of cold air. Is this just a warm-up? He has been tortured to death by Anduin's training for the past month. At the beginning, he couldn't even hold on to running. The spells and delay training in the afternoon were even more tiring. He really couldn't imagine any more cruel training. Seeing Charles's slightly resistant expression, Anduin said seriously, okay, what's the point of suffering a little to improve? Then, Anduin pulled Charles to a flat ground outside and said, let's do it little by little, step by step, so as not to affect your normal studies. Charles naturally nodded in agreement. The next subject is the first one, the standing posture, which mainly includes horse stance, 4-level stands, 3-body stands, Anduin stands, etc. I will mainly teach you the horse stance. Watch my posture. Anduin explained to Charles while demonstrating. Standing posture, what is that? Charles watched Anduin squat with his legs apart, posing a strange posture. Chapter 98 Rune Optimization. Standing in horse stance is good for strengthening the stability of the lower body and enhancing the core strength. Continuously standing in horse stance is also a good exercise for willpower. In my practice of magic, I found that willpower and emotions are important factors that can affect the power of magic. So if you want to strengthen the power of your own magic, tempering your willpower is the simplest way. Anduin took a horse stance and explained to Charles the benefits of horse stance for the body. Okay. Seeing that Anduin advocated this practice method so much, Charles had to imitate Anduin and pose. Anduin looked at Charles' horse stance, stood up and corrected his posture, saying, "Pay attention, stretch your fists forward, keep your arms straight, keep your buttocks in, lift your anus, relax your perineum, and use your hips for support. If you only focus the pressure on your feet, it will cause great damage to your knees." While explaining to Charles, Anduin pointed at him with a stick and kept correcting his posture. "That's good, right? What should I do next?" Charles got into position under Anduin's instruction, and then he saw Anduin looking at him silently, so he asked nervously, "What should I do next?" "Just hold on, and hold on as long as possible. Let's start with 5 minutes." Anduin said expressionlessly. "Hold? Just this position? So tiring." Charles couldn't help but complain to Anduin. "How can you temper your will if you're not tired?" "Don't worry, it's good for you," Anduin said. Under Anduin's gaze, Charles began his journey of standing still, but before 2 minutes, Charles couldn't stand it anymore. It wasn't that his lower body couldn't hold on, but his hands stretched forward began to feel sore, and after a while he couldn't stop shaking from exhaustion, which made Charles complain. But after Charles started standing still, Anduin also stood in front of Charles and demonstrated it to him personally, which made him unable to say no. After a while, Charles' hands were not only sore and shaking, but his entire lower body was also sore, and he felt like he was about to fall at any moment. However, when he saw Anduin in front of him standing in the same position and not moving at all, he could only grit his teeth and hold on. Finally, the 5 minutes were up, and Anduin asked Charles to stand up, but now Charles was stiff and sore all over, and could hardly even stand. He had to personally support Charles and walk back to the hut to rest. "Do you usually exercise like this? Are you really a human?" Charles said speechlessly. "Don't you people know other adjectives? It's really hard at the beginning, but if you stick to it, you will find that this kind of training is good for you. This is just the beginning. Starting tomorrow, the standing time will be extended by 1 minute every day until it can be maintained for 30 minutes. In the future, you will also have to practice magic delay while standing, and then there will be steps, first aid, combat training, etc. Let's take it step by step," Anduin said. You know, in his previous life, his instructor once told him, good steel depends on hammering, and elite soldiers depend on hard training, and now Anduin also adheres to this principle. Charles almost fainted after hearing Anduin's words. He was already so hard-working now, and he couldn't imagine how terrible that training would be in the future. Let Charles rest there, and Anduin went to the next door to prepare dinner. After dinner, Anduin helped Charles, who was weak all over, back to Gryffindor. In the following days, Anduin constantly supervised Charles' training progress, and at the same time collected data on magic sensitivity. Through long-term data, it was shown that the delayed training method he developed was indeed effective in enhancing magic sensitivity, and he also recorded Charles' changes in magic control and spell power. It can be seen that these intensive trainings are still very effective. When Charles casts spells now, both the power and control have been improved. The spells that he couldn't learn before have become easier to master now. Anduin did not stop his spell training with Professor Bones. Recently, Professor Bones guided Anduin to complete his paper on the Echo spell, and also taught him a lot of alchemical application spells. This kind of spell has a characteristic, that is, there is no spell, so it cannot be considered a spell, and can only be enchanted on alchemical props, such as the Swift spell, the Strengthening spell, the Silence spell, the Stress spell, etc. Anduin also felt that he had gained a lot recently. About a week later, Anduin finally got the news from Charles that the senior sister Glenda Chittit had returned to Hogwarts, and asked for the spell of the wind and wave repelling spell at Charles' request, on the condition that Anduin had to give this senior sister a set of Mahjong tiles. Yes, this senior sister who was about to graduate was also a member of the Mahjong club. He didn't know that the little game he accidentally asked his friends to play had already had a group of loyal fans among many students in various colleges. After Anduin got the spell, he began his own test. He found a large basin, filled it with water with the spring spell, threw a stone into it to splash water, and released the wind and wave repelling spell. The spell was not short, and it could be seen that it was a newly invented spell and should not have been optimized many times, but the effect was very obvious. After casting, the layers of water waves in the basin calmed down instantly. Anduin then began to test the sound waves. He put on a monocle, cast an echo spell, and then cast a wind and wave repelling spell into the void. Well, it's similar to what I imagined. It does have the effect of repelling sound waves, but the strength is a bit insufficient. It seems that I have to study the runes of this spell first. Modifying and optimizing this ready-made spell should save a lot of time. Anduin came to his own conclusion after observing through the monocle. Anduin did what he said. He used the magic phonetic method to reverse the spell runes. Generally speaking, it is more difficult to reverse the runes than to translate them. Because for a mature spell, one can only reverse the runes that make up the spell. The specific rune structure and combination method are difficult to reproduce. Fortunately, this spell is a new spell that has not been optimized, so a lot of information can be obtained by reverse calculation. It took nearly 2 days, and with the help of Professor Bones, who was a master of rune deciphering, the runes of the wind and wave expelling spell gradually appeared in front of Anduin. So that's it. This spell not only has the expel rune, but also has the eliminate and stabilize runes. This can really stabilize the wind and waves to the maximum extent. If I add the sound wave recognition rune to this combination, I should be able to accurately eliminate the sound waves. Anduin was intoxicated as he analyzed the spell he had just deciphered, and had a basic optimization plan in mind. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novel, as there you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 99 Hagrid's Sudden Departure. In the next few days, Anduin started to transform and optimize the new spell as soon as he finished his class. With the development process of the previous 2 spells, Anduin did not encounter any difficulties. Soon he transformed a combination of 4 runes based on the original spell. At the end of October, he began intensive experiments. The test method is also very simple. It is mainly divided into 2 steps. The first step is to test whether the spell is harmful to the life form. At this time, the Rat King will appear. First, cast a spell on the rat several times, and then observe if there is anything unusual. If there is no problem, proceed to the next step. This is mainly because he was almost killed by his reckless experiment last time, so for safety reasons, he plans to add this limp to all future experiments. The second step was to start the actual test. He named the spell he had modified the sound wave repelling spell, cast it on himself, and then listened to the natural sounds around him. If he couldn't hear it, he would increase his power and ask Hagrid to help shout a few times. After it was also effective, he began to test the echo spell. The frequency of ultrasound is very high, so theoretically, if it can block ultrasound, it should be able to block all sound waves. Finally, it was to test the infrasound spell again. The 4 spells in the new combination can block natural sounds. Anduin thought after the test, but only the No. 3 spell can completely block ultrasound, so let's use this spell as the optimization subject. Anduin did not rashly try the infrasound spell test. He was not ready to try the feeling of being attacked by his own spell again, so he optimized it twice based on the best rune combination. He decided to conduct the final test after he was fully prepared. After several days of adjusting the spells and repeated ultrasonic tests, Anduin finally made up his mind to start testing the infrasound spell. Time: October 31st, 1938 p.m., second test record of the infrasonic spell begins. Today is Halloween, and Hogwarts has prepared a sumptuous Halloween dinner for the students, as well as ghost shows and so on, but Anduin has no interest in these, so he decided to test the infrasonic spell again. This time he made all the preparations, even mixing 2 bottles of healing potions for himself, and asked Hagrid to help keep an eye on him from a distance, so that if anything unexpected happened, he could come over to help immediately. Anduin exhaled slightly, adjusting his breathing and thoughts to calm himself down completely. Pulling out his wand and pointing it at himself, Anduin cast the silencing spell that he had tested many times steadily and accurately. Anduin shouted a few times to make sure that he didn't hear any sound, and then began to test the infrasonic spell. With a light wave of the wand, the pattern of the spell condensed at the tip of the wand. With a slight flick of the wrist, a wave of magic power spread from the tip of the wand, but Anduin did not hear any sound at this time, and there was no reaction on his body, which even made Anduin doubt whether the spell was successfully cast. With another wave of the wand, Anduin extinguished the spell. To confirm, he looked at the mouse in the cage next to him, and it was bleeding from all 7 orifices and died. It seems to be successful, and the effect of the silencing spell is also very good. Anduin said to himself excitedly, but found that he did not make any sound. Then he realized that the effect of the silencing spell had not ended. Seeing the situation of the test subject and confirming that the infrasonic spell did work, Anduin became bolder and decided to make persistent efforts to continue testing the effect of the infrasonic spell. But at this time, Hagrid ran towards him and tried to say something to him. Anduin could not hear any sound at this time, so he had to quickly remove the sonic expulsion spell on his body. "What's wrong, Hagrid? I just cast a spell on myself, so I can't hear you." Anduin could finally hear his own voice at this time. "I wanted to say that I have to leave for a while. Dumbledore just suddenly notified me and asked me to go find him quickly." Seeing that Anduin finally responded, Hagrid hurriedly finished his words, then picked up his little red umbrella and hurried to the castle. Anduin saw Hagrid's hurried look, and didn't know what happened. He shook his head and decided not to care about it. Anyway, after testing, this sonic expulsion spell was very useful, so he decided to continue the experiment. What he didn't know was that tonight, something happened that changed the entire British wizarding world. At this time, Anduin was still happily testing his spell. It seems that the effect of the infrasonic spell will decay with distance. It will cause a strong interference effect within 10 meters. After more than 10 meters, the mouse will not die. Will it only be interfered with if it is farther away? Anduin excitedly recorded the experimental data in his notebook. After testing, the infrasonic spell will cause strong killing within 5 meters, and the interference ability is also the strongest. The killing effect will be weaker between 5 meters and 10 meters, but the interference effect is still good. After that, the farther the distance, the worse the effect. Anduin looked at the little mouse 30 meters away. Now it was affected by the infrasonic spell, just squeaking in the cage and spinning nervously. Humans are more resistant to sound waves. It seems that after exceeding 10 meters, the interference to humans will decrease more. Anduin kept summarizing. After completing the experiment he had been thinking about, Anduin stretched his body excitedly. It was almost late at night. Hagrid had left for a while, and he didn't know what the guy was busy with. Without thinking too much, he was very satisfied with tonight's experiment, just like solving a math problem that all the classmates couldn't solve. He lay on the bed in a happy mood and slept soundly. And the shocking news appeared the next day. The next morning was a weekend. After doing morning exercises, Anduin and Charles came to the castle hall in high spirits. However, they found that the atmosphere in the hall was different from usual. Almost all the young wizards were not eating. They were all discussing something enthusiastically. The sky was full of owls, constantly dropping letters and newspapers to the young wizards. "Anduin, Anduin, come quickly." Vivian found Anduin and shouted at him. "What happened? Why are you so excited?" Anduin asked in confusion. "Oh my God, haven't you heard about it yet?" Vivian said in shock. At this time, the mysterious man fell. It is said that he was killed by a boy who lived. The Daily Prophet announced the news early this morning, and my family also received a letter to confirm it. "What?" Anduin was shocked and snatched the newspaper from Vivian's hand. Chapter 100. That's the truth. Urgent news from the Daily Prophet. A horrific murder occurred in Godric's Hollow last night. According to sources, the Dark Lord broke into the Potter's home on the night of October 31 and brutally murdered James and Lily, a young couple, and tried to kill their infant child. However, when he was about to attack their child Harry Potter, the Dark Lord's killing curse did not succeed for unknown reasons. According to analysis by senior aurors, the Dark Lord was suspected to have been injured by his own killing curse and died. The boy who survived the killing curse has been protected by Hogwarts headmaster Dumbledore. The cover of the Daily Prophet clearly described last night's tragedy, with headlines such as "The Incident in Godric's Hollow," "The Fall of the You-Know-Who," and "The Boy Who Lived" written in large fonts. Anduin's heart skipped a beat. He didn't expect that the tragedy he had been unwilling to face had still happened. But he couldn't figure it out. Didn't Lily's family have been protected by Dumbledore? And what about Cyrus? Wasn't he responsible for protecting Lily's family? How could such a tragedy still happen? Anduin continued to flip through the Daily Prophet, trying to find the answer in it. On the second page, Anduin saw the news about Cyrus, but it was bad news. The newspaper reported that Cyrus used a spell to blow up an entire street on a Muggle street, killed Peter Pettigrew and 12 Muggles, and was captured by the strikers who arrived at the scene. The reason he did this was because Cyrus betrayed the Potters and directly caused the Godric's Hollow incident. What? Anduin looked at the report in the newspaper with some surprise. For a moment, he was stunned. Vivian beside him was also startled by his roar. After confirming the news of the Dark Lord's fall, the young wizards around them all celebrated excitedly. Some threw their wizard hats, some launched fireworks into the sky above the auditorium, and some even jumped onto the dining table and shouted loudly, including many Slytherin students around Anduin. Only the pure-blood young wizard stared at the newspaper with an expression of disbelief. At this time, Anduin's face was no longer excited and happy as last night, and his expression was full of suspicion and anger. Swish, Anduin stood up from his seat, grabbed the newspaper and ran out of the auditorium. Vivian watched him leave in confusion. Bang bang bang, outside Professor McGonagall's office, Anduin desperately knocked on the door. Professor McGonagall was also a member of the Order of the Phoenix, and he should know what happened. But Anduin waited for a long time, but there was no movement inside. It seemed that Professor McGonagall was not there, so Anduin turned around and rushed to Professor Bones' office. Professor Bones opened the door of his office and saw Anduin gasping for breath, holding a newspaper tightly in his hand. He immediately understood what had happened. He was shocked by what happened last night. "Is it true, Professor?" Anduin stared at Professor Bones and unfolded the Daily Prophet in his hand. "Yes, Dumbledore knew all this last night. He and Professor McGonagall have left Hogwarts now. He arranged for me to stay in Hogwarts to look after the students," Professor Bones said in a deep voice. Then Anduin turned another page of the newspaper. "Is this true? Cyrus, did he really betray that Potters?" "Oh." Professor Bones sighed. "I know you and Cyrus are very good friends, but unfortunately, based on the information we have learned so far, Cyrus did. This is impossible." Anduin shouted in confusion. "I know him, and I know the relationship between him and the Potters. There must be something wrong." "Calm down first, Anduin." Professor Bones pulled Anduin into the room and asked him to sit down. "Facts speak louder than words, and I don't want to believe that this would happen, but, is there any evidence? Even if he killed Peter Pettigrew, there may be some unspeakable hidden reasons." Anduin still couldn't accept this fact. He thought his friend Lily was safe, but she could not escape her fate, and his other good friend was one of the accomplices. "Well, now that things have come to this, I should tell you the truth." Bones thought for a moment. "I know you once suggested to Dumbledore to protect Lily's family, but do you know how they protected Lily's family?" Anduin frowned and looked at Professor Bones in confusion. "Lily's family has never left their original residence, but the Dark Lord and the Death Eaters have never been able to find them. Do you know why?" Bones reminded Anduin. "They have never left, but they can't be found, you mean?" Anduin thought about it and thought of something. "Fideli's charm. So that's why my memory of their home address suddenly disappeared?" Bones nodded. He knew that Anduin had accumulated a lot of knowledge and was sure that he would understand it at a glance. "So you know why we are so sure? You mean, Cyrus is the secret keeper of Lily and James?" Anduin asked. "Yeah, didn't you notice that Cyrus disappeared after hiding the Potters?" Bones reminded. "At first we thought he hid himself to avoid the Death Eaters, but that may not be the case. Then is it possible that the Death Eaters found and captured him, and he was tortured and revealed Lily's residence?" Anduin really couldn't accept such a result. If that's the case, how could he have the energy to attack Peter? Bones said seriously, "And you may not know enough about the Fideli's charm. Unless the Keeper takes the initiative to reveal the secret, even the Imperious Curse or the Veritaserum can't pry open his mouth." That's the fact." Anduin sighed lightly and looked at the newspaper in front of him in disappointment. Although he couldn't believe it, Professor Bones ruthlessly punctured his fantasy. Professor Bones knew that Anduin had a deep friendship with the Potters and Cyrus, and now he didn't know how to comfort him. Anduin didn't know how he got back to the Forbidden Forest Lodge. He was still shocked by the news he had just received. He didn't know the plot development, so he didn't know if everything that happened today was the same as in the original story. But when he really got into it, he found that he couldn't look at these living people from a third-party perspective, whether it was Lily, who was always kind and gentle and helpful to him, or Cyrus, who was free and unrestrained and loved to show off. It was not until they left that he felt this inexplicable loss from the bottom of his heart. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.